Right-oh, and I'll make that the hour. So, hello everyone. Thank you all for being there so promptly today. I genuinely appreciate it. Before we get back started with the main stuff today, though, we've got a couple of bits of business. First off, Abbo once again, securing first, so we've got to update the board. There we are. That marks the 5th time. Gonna have to remember the higher Roman numerals. Hey Robert, yeah, good to have you. Second piece of business actually. I do have a couple of thanks to give out. First to Tusk Robert, who is here in chat for the follow, as well as Death's Jinx, who also followed me the other day. I genuinely appreciate it. We grow ever closer to the time where I'll be able to give people little VIP status for the little diamond badge, which I'm excited about. And speaking of badges, on to the next piece of news. I put up a little sign. So for those of you who was in my Valfex stream, of which I know there's at least 2 of you, because you're wearing the badge you got from it, you know that I'd quite like doing little badge drops for just random things. And I thought, wow, this story's about a castle. What's a fun badge we could do for that? So I thought, yeah, let's do some badges. So I'll drop the subscription badge first, because I don't expect people to get it. But if you do want to subscribe today, or any time during the sort of reading this, you will get this fun little castle badge with the lightning and all that. Which I've no idea how it will look as a tiny little thing in chat, but it's available if you want it. And if you just want to stick around and watch, you also get a badge, which is a similar castle, but a little less gothic and striking. So those are going a day. For, what is it, just an hour watch time or a single subscription thingy. So yeah, those are all around. What else? What else? What else? What else? Wild energy though. We got a big mood going on. I feel like something is hunting me. So I'm excited. Ooh.
Nazca 47 has pledged themselves to Lamp as a tier 1 initiate.
Wow, thank you kindly, Nazca. I guess someone likes the badges. So, welcome on board. You are now a tier 1 initiate in the library. This grants you special access and privileges. I don't know what those are though. But if you ever want to come to the old Orient Prog and crawl in here, presumably it will mean something. Thank you very kindly. I hope you enjoy your new badge. What else are we doing? What else was that? So yeah. But yeah. What else? Yeah, hunted energy. Why was I talking about hunted energy? Right. I feel like I do when I'm being hunted by something. And that's good and relevant information, because today, in the little bit of time that I talk about the library before I think, ooh, a hub train. I didn't even, I think this is my first hub train. Wow. Everything's going on tonight. Wild energy. But yeah. What was I talking about? Yeah, so, for those of you who is new, which presumably is just Robert, but who knows, there might be people lurking. For anyone who is new, at the start of the stream, they give people a little bit of time to arrive before I dive into the story, because, you know, you want to be here for an old story if there's going to be a story. I talk a little bit about the library, and so far we've covered the upper floors and the residential and office spaces, and we've covered the main bulk of the library and archive itself. But the part we're on to today, which I'm supposed to be talking about, is the laboratories, which are the deep ones, down from floor 53 to 64. 11 floors of them. And the reason these are so down low is because these are the dangerous labs. There are other more normal labs up in some of the residential areas and such. But down there are basically 4 types of labs, as well as some specialised labs that are really, like, there's not enough of them to be worth going into. But these labs is where all of the beasts in the library come from. And they're running basically 4 flavours, like I said. You have what you got, demonic summoning labs, which is specifically for the summoning of Lamp talks about it a lot. Like, apparently there's a difference between invoking or evoking a demon and then summoning one with like a corporeal form. But like, apparently they're all bad news. So all the demonic stuff down there. There are also the Golemancy workshops, which is, for those unfamiliar, Golemancy is the making of an animated kind of construct to, you know, do things, do your bid and all that. It's a bit like a magic robot. But they was down there because a golem that is like non-functioning is very dangerous. They're autonomous, so they can just go out of control. So they want them deep down so they're not dangerous. Demons deep down so they don't get out. Then you have the experimental alchemy labs. Those is all down there. Now there's normal alchemy labs elsewhere, but from what I've been able to glean, those are all like for making things that were, you know, established, like recipes. Experimental alchemy, very dangerous, lots of potential for explosions or poisons or chemical reactions, all sorts of things. So those is down there. And then you also have carnomancy workshops. Now carnomancy is a specialisation of necromancy, or a subfield of necromancy, whatever you want to call it, but specifically dealing with muscular tissue, like flesh. Now there are other workshops where they work with bone and like souls and stuff, which are less dangerous. But muscle tissue is apparently a very dangerous field of necromancy because it's where all of the like native power comes from. So like force, all that sort of thing. And a badly animated skeleton is just not going to work very well. But badly animated carnomantic constructs, like made out of muscle, are basically big writhing piles of power and strength that can, you know, go bad. And they're sort of like horrible and bleedy and tentacly and all dangerous. So those is all down there. Now that's a pretty rough place, but when it's well kept and you know, in control, apparently it was fine. It was well regulated. There were systems to destroy things. There has been no maintenance in this place for 70 years. So all the demons that was waiting around there, all the unfinished carnomantic constructs, all the half-finished golems, and all the like weird alchemicals, like, they've broken containment. I mean, the alchemicals probably didn't break containment, but the rest of those things did. And what happened next is they run into each other. Like, that's apparently that's probably the first thing that happened because they're all on the same floor. So you don't have wandering like half-functional golems or carnomantic constructs or all that. Humanmancy workshop. I think there was some of them up in the higher floors. I don't know, like, again, Lamp doesn't tell me necessarily everything about magic, but I think humanmancy is considered to be one of the like, what about humanmancy workshops? Hang on, let's go ask the man himself. For those of you not familiar, you guys can't hear Lamp talk because he talks directly into my mind, but okay. Lamp says there were a couple of humanmancy workshops higher up. Yeah, praise the Lamp. Yeah, a couple of the humanmancy workshops higher up. There was one that was sort of dealing with medical issues, and there were pre-described things. But there were some humanmancy workshops on, apparently specifically floor 64. But they were considered dangerous not so much because they was doing work with blood, but because they specialised in alchemical transference of blood as a medium. So there were experimental alchemy hemomancy workshops that did that, apparently down there, as well as more normal hemomancy workshops. But yeah, so like I said, all these things break out of containment and they interact with each other. So the beasts you have wandering around ain't any one thing. They are, they are like demonically possessed golems, or climatic contracts powered by a golem core, all of these things augmented by alchemy, all that sort of stuff, really. Ooh, and apparently we're having issues with the wards where the music is not playing, right? So that's fun. Everything happening today. Okay. Ooh, and I look to be frozen. Oh, and we're dropping a lot of frames. What's going on? Ooh. Hello? Oh. Everything's going wrong. Hello, can you hear me? Hello, hello, you there? Oh dear. Ooh. Everything's going wrong. Okay. This is fun. What can we do about this? Okay, you can still hear me. That's good. Oh, thanks for the greeting, Robert. Do appreciate it. Okay, so having issues with the wards. This always happens. I am not being shown. This often happens when we have ward issues. Yeah. This basically just means that the scrying, anti-scrying function is acting up. So.
Oh, the rat!
Ooh, that just played for me. Well, it's going to be an interesting stream tonight. Something's going a bit wrong. I don't know what it is, but yeah. Still, hopefully it all works out. Whereas it doesn't, and we see how we go. But yeah. So. That's what's all down in those sort of lower floors, and that's where you get the sort of majority of the beasts. Oh, I'm back. But yeah. So well, I said majority of the beasts. That's not true. The majority of the beasts is those ones I was telling you about last time, which is made out of like broken books of paper. But the majority of the dangerous beasts is from there. They're these, you know, like big, lumbering, like dangerous, strange. All of them's very weird. Lamp says, technically speaking, I'm one of them, but I don't think that's fair. I did eat some sort of weird potion that made me like I am, but I don't think it's clear to classify me as a beast. Maybe it is, I don't know. Anyhow, that has been 10 minutes, so technically speaking we are now ready to go and begin and do the book. But if anyone has any questions, I'm also happy to take those. What else? Wow. Yeah. I always feel like I'm forgetting something as well, but I don't think I am. But yeah. If I am, again, feel free to let me know. But yeah, what we do? Oh yeah, so book today. We're doing Castle Rackrent, which has the little like subtitle here, an Hibernian tale, but apparently that's just a little thing on this book. It's not necessarily a part of the text, which is why I haven't been describing it as such in a lot of the promotional stuff. But yeah, that's why we got a castle badge, and as always, gonna be reading through this. If as I go there's a problem with the stream, or I skip something, or you haven't heard something, let me know. I'm happy to go back over anything. If you have questions, thoughts, feel free to let me know. Always happy to have a chat with chat, as it were. Yeah, what else? This one is reasonably long. I think it's around about the same length as Valfec, which was a 2-streamer, around about 4 hours total. Well, it's not quite as long as Valfec. Valfec with 98 pages. This is only 74, so probably still a 2-streamer, but who knows? Maybe I'll push real long today and we'll get through it in like 4 hours tonight in one sitting. Never know, never know. But yeah, the plan is, however, to probably going to do it in 2 streams. Like I am feeling wild and strange tonight, so who knows? Maybe we'll push on. We'll see how we feel. But words, yeah, things and thoughts and ideas and all that. You know, you never know what's going to happen. Maybe beasts will come. Maybe I am being owned. Maybe we'll be interrupted. Maybe things will crash. all the unknowns that happen, eh? But before we start, I'll have a quick drink. Important to keep your throat in good nick while you're doing this. Yeah. Everything's fine. There are no problems. There could never be a problem. But yeah, that is. Yeah, I think that's about all I've got to say. So if no one's got any further questions, which I don't think you do, because I've been rambling about questions for about 2 minutes now, and without any further ado, I shall begin. Castle Rackrent. Preface. The prevailing taste of the public for anecdote has been censored and ridiculed by critics who aspire to the character of superior wisdom. But if we consider it in proper point of view, this taste is an incontestable proof of the good sense and profoundly philosophic temper of the present times. Of the numbers who study, or at least who read history, how few derive any advantage from their labours. The eras of history are so decked out by fine fancy of the professed historian, they talk in such measured prose and act from such sublime or such diabolical motives, that few have sufficient taste, wickedness or heroism to sympathise in their fate. Besides, there is much uncertainty even in the best authenticated ancient or modern histories, and the love of truth, which in some minds is innate and immutable, necessarily leads to a love of secret memoirs and private anecdotes. We cannot judge either of the feelings or of the characters of men with perfect accuracy from their actions or their appearance in public. It is from their careless conversations, their half-finished sentences, that we may hope with the greatest probability of success to discover their real characters. The life of a great or a little man written by himself, the familiar letters, the diary of any individual published by his friends or by his enemies after his decease, are esteemed important literary curiosities. We are surely justified in this eager desire to collect the most minute fact relative to the domestic law. Ooh. Always there's one, right. Quickly kill the clanker. Ooh. I really should give someone a sword one of these days so they can do that for me, but yeah. Collect the most minute facts relative to domestic lives, not only of the great and good, but even of the worthless and insignificant, since it is only by comparison to their actual happiness or misery in the privacy of domestic life that we can form a just estimate of the real reward of virtue or the real punishment of vice. That the great are not as happy as they seem, that the eternal circumstances of fortune and rank do not constitute felicity, is assured by every moralist. The historian... Indeed, Robert, yeah. The historian can seldom, consistently with his dignity, pause to illustrate this truth. It is therefore to the biography we must have recourse. After we have beheld splendid characters playing their parts on the great theatre of the world, with all the advantages of stage effect and direct decoration, we anxiously beg to be admitted beyond the scenes, that we may take a nearer view of the actors and actresses. Some may perhaps imagine that the value of biography depends upon the judgment and taste of the biographer. On the contrary, it may be maintained that the merits of a biographer are inversely as the extent of his intellectual powers and of his literary talents. A plain, unvarnished tale is preferable to the most highly ornamented narrative. Where we see that a man has the power, we may naturally suspect that he has the will to deceive us, and those who are used to literary manufacture know how much is often sacrificed to the rounding of a period or the point in an antithesis. Antithesis, I should say. That the ignorant may have their prejudices as well as the learned cannot be disputed, but we see and despise vulgar errors. We never bow to the authority of him who has no great name to sanction its absurdities. The partiality which blinds a biographer to the defects of his era, in proportion as it is gross, ceases to be dangerous. If it be concealed by the appearance of candour, which men of great abilities best know how to assume, it endangers our judgment sometimes, and sometimes our morals. If Her Grace, the Duchess of Newcastle, instead of penning her lord's elaborate eulogium, had undertaken to write the life of Savage, we should not have been in any danger of mistaking an idle, ungrateful libertine for a man of genius and virtue. The talents of a biographer are often fatal to his reader. For these reasons, the public often judiciously countenances those who, without sagacity to discriminate character, without elegance of style to relieve the tediousness of the narrative, without enlargement of mind to draw any conclusion from the facts they relate, simply pour forth anecdotes and retell conversations with all the minute prolixity of a gossip in a country town. Prolixity? That's a third double word. The author of the following memoirs has, upon these grounds, fair claims to the public favour and attention. He was an illiterate old steward, whose partially to the family in which he was bred and born must be obvious to the reader. He tells the history of the Rackrent family in his vernacular idiom, and in the full confidence that Sir Patrick, Sir Murtagh, Sir Kit, and Sir Condy Rackrent's affairs will be as interesting to all the world as they were to himself. Those who was acquainted with the manners of a certain class of the gentry of Ireland some years ago want no evidence of the truth of honest Thaddeus' narrative. To those who are totally unacquainted with Ireland, the following memoirs will perhaps be scarcely intelligible, or probably they may appear perfectly incredible. For the information of the ignorant English reader, a few more notes have been subjoined by the editor, and he had it at once in contemplation to translate the language of Thaddeus into plain English. But Thaddeus' idiom is incapable of translation, and besides, the authenticity of his story would have been more exposed to doubt if it were not told in his own characteristic manner. Several years ago he related to the editor the history of the Rackrent family, and it was with some difficulty that he was persuaded to have it committed to writing. However, his feelings for the honour of the family, as he expressed himself, prevailed over his habitual laziness, and he at length completed the narrative, which is only now laid before the public. The editor hopes his readers will observe that these are tales of other times, that the manners depicted in the following pages are not those of the present age. The race of the Rackrents has long since been extinct in Ireland, and the drunken Sir Patrick, the litigious Sir Murtagh, the fighting Sir Kit, and the slovenly Sir Condy are characters which could no more be met with at present in Ireland than Squire Weston or Parson Trollope in England. There is time when individuals can bear to be rallied for their past follies and absurdities, after they have acquired new habits and a new consciousness. Nations as well as individuals gradually lose attachments to their identity, and the present generation is amused rather than offended by the ridicule that is thrown upon their ancestors. Probably we shall soon have it in our power, in 100 instances, to verify the truth of these observations. When Ireland loses her identity by a union with Great Britain, she will look back with a smile of good-humoured complacency on the Sir Kits and Sir Condys of her former existence. And that's the end of the preface. Have a quick swallow of water here. So this is broken into, I would assume, chapters, or maybe it has just a preface, but if it's in chapters I'll do a little bit of, analysis after each one, and since the preface is done I'll do that. It's an interesting one. Gives sort of a framing to or narrative to the thing, or a framing character I should say, in this, what is it, Thaddeus. There's a couple of things to note. First, I do like the idea that he's discussing the importance of biography, and the idea that a poorly written one is actually more believable or credible than an unwritten one. That's my work done for me there, in part. I do appreciate the description of the English as ignorant in this particular case, which in the notion of the nation of Ireland is true enough. Well, the idea that Ireland should have a union with Great Britain and think which got back with sort of a fond contempt of its past seems a little bit naive in retrospect, given how things actually went. But yeah, we've got 4 principal characters suggested. Kits, Condy, Murtagh, and Patrick seem to be the generations of a family called Rackrent, and presumably there will be a castle involved somewhere. I think that's about all we've got for today, so I'll have another quick sip of water before we press on, and then we'll see how we go. And our Burnian tale, Castle Rackrent. Monday morning. Hang on. Okay, so those mentioned appendices, they are little footnotes, so I will try and comment on them when they fall. Having out of friendship for the family, upon whose estate, praise be to heaven, I and mine have lived rent-free since time out of mind, voluntarily undertaking to publish the memoirs of the Rackrent family, I think it my duty to say a few words, in the first place, concerning myself. My real name is Thaddy Quirk, though in the family I have always been known by no other name than Honest Thaddy. Afterwards, in the time of Sir Murtagh, deceased, I remember to hear them calling me Old Thaddy, and now I'm come to Poor Thaddy, for I wear a long great coat winter and summer, which is very handy, as I never put my arms into the sleeves. They're as good as new. I come the Hollantard next, I've had it these 7 years. It holds on by a single button round my neck, cloak fashion. But look at me, you would hardly think Poor Thaddy were the father of an attorney. Of Attorney Quirk. I'm just going to pause here because there was a little note appended to the long greatcoat. A cloak or mantle was described by Thaddy as of high antiquity. Spencer, in his view of the state of Ireland, proves that it is not, as some have imagined, peculiarly derived from the Scythians, but that most nations of the world anciently used the mantle, for the Jews used it, as you may read of Elias's mantle, etc. The Chaldees also used it, as you may read in Diodorus. The Egyptians likewise used it, as you may read in Herodotus, and may be gathered by the descriptions of Bernice and the Greek commentary upon Callimachus. The Greeks also used it anciently as a period by Venus's mantle lined with stars, though afterwards they changed the form thereof into their cloaks, called pallia, and some of the Irish also use. In ancient Latins, the Romans used it, as you may read in Virgil with great antiquity, that Evander, when Aeneas come to him at his feast, did entertain and feast him, sitting on the ground and lying on mantles, insomuch so as he useth the very word mantle for mantle. Humi mantilia sternant. So that it seemeth that the mantle were generally habit to most nations, and not proper to Scythians only. Spencer knew the convenience of said mantle was housing, bedding, and clothing. Dear Lord, this is a long thing. I ran, because the commodity doth not countervail the discommodity. The inconvenience which thereby do arise are much more for many, for it is fit as an house for an outlaw, a meat bed for a rebel, and an cloak for a thief. First the outlaw being, for his many crimes and villainy, is banished from the towns and houses of honest men, and wandering in waste places far from danger of law, maketh his mantle his house, and under it covereth himself from the wrath of heaven, from the offence of the earth, and from the sight of men. When it raineth, it is his penthouse, when it bloweth, it is his tent, when it freezeth, it be his tabernacle. In summer he can wear it loose, in winter he can wrap it close, at all times he can use it. Never cumbersome. Likewise for a rebel it is serviceable, for in this war that he maketh, if at least it deserve the name of war, when he still flieth from his foe, and lurketh in the thick woods, brackets this should be black bogs, and straight passage waiting for advantage, it is his bed, yea, and almost his household stuff. I did not feel super relevant, and was very long, and I'm not sure I'm going to do more of them, but in this particular case it did regard specifically a disreputable coat, which is a particular interest of mine, so I gave it the follow. You would hardly think Poor Thaddy were the father of Attorney Quick. He's an our gentleman, and ne'er mind what Poor Thaddy says, and having better than 1,500 a year landed estate, looks down upon honest Thaddy. But I'll wash my hands of his doings, and as I have lived so will I die, true and loyal to the family. The family of the Rackrents is, I'm proud to say, one of the most ancient in the kingdom. Everybody knows this is not the old family name, which was O'Shawlin, related to the kings of Ireland. But that was before my time. My grandfather was a driver of the great Sir Patrick O'Shawlin, and I have heard him, when I was a boy, telling how the Castle Rackrent estate come to Sir Patrick. Sir Talio Rackrent was cousin german to him, and had a fine estate of his own, only never a gate upon it, being his maxim that a car was the best gate. Poor gentleman. He lost a fine hunter in his life at last by it, all in one day's hunt. I ought to bless that day, for the estate comes straight into the family, upon one condition, which Sir Patrick O'Shawlin at the time took sadly to heart, they say, but thought better of it afterwards, seeing how large a stake depended upon it, that he should, by Act of Parliament, take and bear the surname and arms of Rackrent. Now the world will see what was in Sir Patrick, On coming into the estate, he gave the finest entertainment ever was heard of in the country. Not a man could stand after supper but Sir Patrick himself, who could sit out the best man in Ireland, let alone the three kingdoms itself. He had his house, from one year's end to another, as full of company as ever it could hold, and fuller, for rather than be left out of the parties at Castle Rackrent, many gentlemen and those men of the first consequence and landed estates in the country, such as the O'Neills of Ballynagrotti, and the Moneygalls of Mount Juliet's Town, and O'Shannons of the Newtown Tolliog, made their choice often and often, but there were no moon to be had for love or money, in long winter nights, to sleep in the chicken house which Sir Patrick had fitted up for the purpose of accommodating his friends and the public in general who honoured him with their company unexpectedly at Castle Rackrent. And this went on, I can't tell you how long. The old country rang with his praises. Long life to him. I'm sure I'll have to look upon his picture now opposite to me. Though I never saw him, he must have been a portly gentleman. His neck something short and remarkable for the largest pimple on his nose, which by his particular desire is still extant in his picture, and said to be a striking likeness, and taken when young. He is said also to be the inventor of raspberry whisky, which is very likely, as nobody has ever appeared to dispute it with him, and as there still exists a broken punch bowl at Castle Stopgap in the garret with an inscription to that effect, with great curiosity. A few days before his death, he was very merry, it being his honour's birthday. He called my great-grandfather in, God bless him, to drink the company's health, and filled a bumper himself, but could not carry it to his head on account of the great shake in his hand. On this he cast his joke, saying, "What would my poor father say to me if he was to pop out of the grave and see me now?" I remember, when I was a little boy, the first bumper of claret he gave me after dinner, how he praised me for carrying it so steadily to my mouth. Here's my thanks to him, a bumper toast. And he fell to singing the favourite song he learned from his father, the last time, poor gentleman. He sang it that night as loud and hearty as ever, with a chorus. He that goes to bed and goes to bed sober falls as the leaves do, falls as the leaves do, and dies in October. But he that goes to bed and goes to bed mellow lives as he ought to, lives as he ought to, and dies an honest fellow. Sir Patrick died that night, just as the company rose to drink his health with 3 cheers. He fell down in a sort of a fit, and then were carried off. They sat out and were surprised on inquiry in the morning to find it were all over with. Poor Sir Patrick. Never did any gentleman live and die more beloved in the country by rich and poor. His funeral was such a one who was never known before nor since in the country. Or in the county, sorry. All the gentlemen in the 3 counties were at it, far and near how they flocked. And my great-grandfather said that to see all the women, who, even in their red cloaks, he would have taken them for an army drawn out. And such a fine will you are, as you might have heard it from the farthest end of the country, and happy the man who could get but a sight of the arse. But who'd have thought it? Just as all was going on, right, through his own town they were passing, when the body was seized for debt. A rescue was apprehended from the mob, but the heir who attended the funeral were against that, for fear of consequences, seeing that those villains acted under the disguise of the law. So to be sure, the law must take its course, and little gain of the creditors for their pains. First and foremost, they had the curse of the country, and Sir Rackrent, the new heir in the next place, on account of this affront to the body, refused to pay a shilling of the debts, in which he were countenanced by all the best gentlemen of property, and others of his acquaintance. Sir taught a legend in all companies that he all along meant to pay his father's debts of honour, but the moment the law were taken of him, there were an end of the honour to be sure. It were whispered, but none of the enemies of the family believe it, but none but the enemies of the family believe it, that this were all a sham at seizure to get quit of the debts, which he had bound himself to pay in honour. It's a long time ago, there's no saying how it was, but this was certain. The new man did not take at all after the old gentleman. The cellars was never filled after his death, and no open house or anything as it used to be. The tenants even were sent away without their whisky. I was ashamed myself, and knew not what to say for the honour of the family, but I made the best of a bad case, and I laid it all at my lady's door, for I did not like her anyhow, nor anybody else. She were of the family of the Skinflints, and a widow. It's a strange match for Sir Martha. The people in the country thought he demeaned himself greatly, but I said nothing. I knew how it was. Sir Martha were a great lawyer, and looked at the great Skinflint estate. There, however, he overshot himself. Though one of the co-heiresses, he were never the better for her, for she outlived him many's a long day. He could not foresee that, to be sure, when he married her, I must say for her, she made him the best of wives, being a very notable stirring woman, and looking close to everything. But I always suspected she had Scotch blood in her veins. Anything else I could have looked over in her, from a regard to the family. She was a strict observer for self and servants of Lent, and all fast days, but not holidays. One of the maids, having fainted 3 times the last day of Lent, to keep soul and body together, we put a morsel of roast beef into her mouth, which came from Sir Murtag's dinner. We never fasted, not he. But somehow or other it unfortunately reached my lady's ears, and the priest of the parish had a complaint made of it the next day, and the poor girl was forced, as soon as she could walk, to do penance for it, before she could get any peace or absolution in the house or out of it. However, my lady was very charitable in her own way. She had a charity school for poor children, where they was taught to read and write gratis, and where they was kept well to spinning gratis for my lady in return. For she had always eats a duty yarn from the tenants, and got all her household linen out of the estate from first to last. For after the spinning, the weavers of the estate took it in, and for nothing, because of the looms of my lady's interest could get from the linen board to distribute gratis. Then there was a bleach yard near us, and the tenants dare refuse my lady nothing for fear of a lawsuit, so Martha kept hanging over about him. About the water, of course. But these ways of managing, 'tis surprising how cheap my lady got things done, and how proud she was of it. Her table was the same way, kept for next to nothing. Duty fowls and duty turkeys, and duty geese come as fast as we could eat them. But my lady kept a sharp lookout, and knew to a tub of butter everything that the tenants had, all round. They knew her way, and what with fear of driving for rent and Sir Martag's lawsuits, they were kept in such good order that they never thought of coming near Castle Stopgap without a present or something or other. Nothing too much, or too little, for my lady. Eggs, honey, butter, meal, fish, game, grouse and herring, fresh or salt, all went for something. As for young pigs, we had them and the best bacon and hams they could make up, with all young chickens in spring. They were a set of poor wretches, and we had nothing but misfortunes with them, always breaking and running away. This Sir Murtagh, my lady said, were all their former landlord Sir Patrick's fault. We'll let them all get the half year's rent into arrear. There was something in that, to be sure. But Sir Murtagh were as much the country way, for let alone making English tenants of them for every soul. He were always driving and pounding and canting and replevian, and he made a good living of trespass cattle. There were always some tenant's pig or horse, or cow, or calf, or goose trespassing, which was so great a grain of Sir Murtagh that he did not like to hear me talk about repairing fences. Then his Harriets and duty work brought him in something. His turf were cut, his potatoes set and dug, his hay brought home, and in short all the work about his house done for nothing. For in all our leases there were strict clauses with heavy penalties, which Sir Murtagh knew well how to enforce. So many days' duty work of the man and horse from every tenant he was to have, and had every year. And when a man vexed him, why the finest day he could pitch on, when the crater was getting in his own harvest, or the thatch in his cabin, Sir Murtagh made it a principle to call upon him in his house. So he taught them all, as he said, to know the law of the landlord and tenant. As for law, I believe no man, dead or alive, ever loved it so well as Sir Murtagh. He had once 16 suits pending at a time, and I never saw him own so much himself. Roads, lanes, bogs, wells, ponds, eelwars, orchards, trees, tars, vagrants, gravel pits, sand pits, dunghills and nuisances. Everything upon the face furnished him good matter for a suit. He used to boast that he had a lawsuit for every letter in the alphabet. How I used to wonder to see Sir Murtagh in the midst of the papers in his office. I could hardly turn about for him. I made bold to shrug my shoulders once in his presence, and thank my stars I were not born a gentleman so much toil and trouble. But Sir Murtagh looked me up short with his old proverb, learning is better than house or land. Out of 49 suits which he had, he never lost one but 17. The rest he gained with costs, double costs, treble costs sometimes. Even that it did not pay. He was a very learned man in the law, and had the character of it, but how it was I couldn't tell, but these suits he carried cost him a power of money. In the end he sold some hundreds a year from the family estate. He were a very learned man in the law, and I know nothing of the matter except having a great regard for the family. I could not help grieving, but when he sent me up to post up notices of the sale of the fee simple of the lands and apparatuses of Timor League. I know, honest daddy, he said to comfort me, but I'm about better than you do. I'm only selling it to get the ready money wanting to carry on the suit with spirit with the Nugents of Carrack Shoblin. They were very sanguine about the suit with the Nugents of Caracas-Oberlin. He would have gained it, they say, for certain, had it pleased Heaven to have spared him to us, and it would have been at least a plump 2,000 a year in his way. But things was ordered otherwise, for the best to be sure. He dug up a fairy mount against my advice, and had no luck afterwards. And the little note here? These fairy mounds are called anthills in England. They are held to high reverence by the common people in Ireland. A gentleman who, in laying out his lawn, had occasion to level one of these hillocks, could not prevail upon any of his labourers to begin the ominous work. He was obliged to take the law from one of their reluctant hands, and began the attack himself. The labourers agreed that the vengeance of the fairies would fall upon his head of the presumptuous mortal who first disturbed them in their retreat. He dug up a fairy mount against my advice and had no luck afterwards. Though a learned man in the law, he were a little too incredulous in other matters. I warned him that I heard the very banshee that my grandfather heard before I was born, long under Sir Patrick's window for a few days before his death. And another little aside. The banshee is a species of aristocratic fairy, who, in the shape of a little hideous old woman, has been known to appear and heard to sing in a mournful supernatural voice under the windows of great houses, to warn the family that some of them are soon to die. In the last century, every great family in Ireland had a banshee, who attended regularly, but latterly their visits and songs have been discontinued. A few days before his death. But Sir Martel thought nothing of the banshee, nor of his cough with a spitting of blood, brought on, I understand, by catching cold in attending the courts, and overstraining his chest with making himself heard in one of his favourite courses. He was a great speaker with a powerful voice, but his last speech were not in the course at all. He and my lady were both of the same way of thinking in some things, and though she were a good wife and great economist, as you could see, and he the best of husbands, to looking into his affairs and making money for his family, yet I don't know how it was, they had a great deal of sparring and jarring between them. My lady had her privy purse, and she had her weed ashes, and her sealing money, upon the signing of all the leases, with something to buy gloves besides. And besides again often took money from the tenants, if offered properly, to speak for them to Sir Mortog about his abatements and renewals. Now the weed ashes and the glove money he allowed her clear prerequisites, though once when he saw her in a new gown saved out of the weed ashes, he told her to Marface, for he could say a sharp thing, that she should not put on her weeds before her husband's death. But it grew more serious when they come to the renewal business. At last, in a dispute about an abatement, my lady would have the last word, and Sir Martog grew mad. I were hearing of the door, and now wish I had made bold to step in. He spoke so loud the old kitchen were out on the stairs. All on a sudden he stopped, and my lady too. Something had surely happened, thought I, and so it were, for Sir Mortar, in his passion, broke a blood vessel, and all the law in the land could do nothing in that case. My lady sent for 5 physicians, but Sir Martyr died and were buried. She had a fine jointure settled upon her, and took herself away to the great joy of the tenantry. I ne'er said anything one way or the other, while she were part of the family, but got up to see her go at 3 o'clock in the morning. It's a fine morning, honest daddy, says she. Goodbye to you. And into the carriage she stepped without a word more, good or bad, or even half a crown. But I made my bow and stood to see her safe out of sight for the sake of the family. I'm going to take a quick break there, and I'll have a quick sip of water, since we've just been through another family member. So a little bit of reflection then when we paused. We got Sir Patrick and Sir Mortog, 2 diametrically opposed men, seemingly. Patrick, a good and beloved man, open with his generosity and hospitality, welcoming the people, giving out lavish feasts and abeyances, and racking up debts. And his son, with a spendthrift wife, the very picture of the horrible landlord you don't want to deal with. His wife extracting things from the peasantry, and making every use of all the tenants, fill the larder and stock the linens, and the husband engaged in endless petty disputes over the law. And not even very well, for he kept losing money on them. Though of course the last one would have worked out, as I'm sure they said that all the ones prior would surely have worked out. A fine thing indeed. But yeah, we got a little bit of fairy law there in the banshee, same as we had the cloak law and the what's the other name? And the ferryman, yeah, ferrymans and banshees, both. Now, I've heard of both of these before. The banshee specifically is a very famous little bit of folklore. I've never heard it called an aristocratic fairy before, which is interesting, since it apparently only appears to the R families in this game. But ferrymans is pretty well known. The idea of dismissing them as anthills is a bit rude. But even to this day, people in Ireland do not like to disturb a ferryman. It often causes issues with road construction and other industry and development projects, which is quite fun and good. Because there's too much industry and development and not enough little piles of dirt. But yeah. That's all I have to say really, so we'll press on. Then we was all bustle in the house, which made me keep out of the way, for I walked slow and ate a bustle. At the house were all hurry-scurry, preparing for my new master, Sir Murtagh. I forgot to notice had no childer. And this had a note. Childer, this is the manner in which many a Thaddeus rank and others in Ireland formally pronounce the word children. That feels a little bit obvious, but okay. Don't know much on the internet. Sir Murtagh, I forgot to notice, had no childer, and so the Rackrent estate went to his younger brother, a young dashing officer. He come amongst us before I knew for the life of me whereabouts I was, in a gig or some of them things, with another sparking on with him, and had horses and servants and dogs, and scarce a place to put any Christian of them into. For my late lady had sent all the feather beds off before her, and blankets and household linen, down to the very knife cloths, and the cars to Dublin, which are all her own, lawfully paid for out of her own money. So the house were quite bare, and my young master, the moment ever he set foot in it out of his gig, thought all those things must come of themselves, I believe, for he never looked after anything at all. But harum-scarum called for everything as if we were conjurers, or in a public house. For my part, I could not bestir myself anyhow. I've been so used to my late master and mistress, all was upside down with me, and the new servants in the servants' hall were quite out of my way. I had nobody to talk to, and if it had not been for my pipe and tobacco, I verily believe, have broke my heart for poor Sir Murtagh. But one morning my new master caught a glimpse of me as I was looking at his horse's heels in hopes of a word from him. And that is old Faddy, he says, as he got into his gig. I loved him from that day to this. His horse were like the family. And he threw me a guinea out of his waistcoat pocket as he drew up the reins with the other hand, his horse rearing too. I thought I never set my eyes on a finer figure of a man. Quite another sort from Sir Murtagh. They were all to me a family likeness. A fine life we should have led, and he stayed among us, God bless him. He valued a guinea as little as any man. Money to him was no more than dirt, and his gentleman and groom, and all belonging to him, the same. With the sporting season over, he grew tired of the place, and having got down a great architect for the house, an improver for the grounds, and seen their plans and elevations, he fixed a day for settling with the tenants, but went off in a whirlwind to town, just as some of them come into the yard in the morning. A circular letter come next, post from the new agent, with news that the master was sailed for England, and he must remit £500 to Bath for his use, but for a fortnight were at an end. Bad news still for the poor tenants, no change still for the better with them. Sir Kit, stopgap, my young master, left all to the agent, and though he had the spirit of a prince, and lived away to the honour of his country abroad, which I were proud to hear of, what were we the better for that at home? The agent was one of your middlemen, who grind the face of the poor, and can never bear a man with an hat upon his head. There's a little note here for middlemen. Middlemen. There was a class of men termed middlemen in Ireland, who took large farms on long leases from gentlemen or landed property, and set the lands again in small portions to the poor, as under tenants, at exorbitant rents. The head landlord, as he was called, seldom saw his under tenants, but if he could not get the middleman to pay him his rent punctually, he went to the land and drove for his rent. That is to say, he sent his steward, or bailiff, or driver of the land, to seize the cattle, hay, corn, flax, oats, or potatoes belonging to the under tenants, and proceed to sell these for his rent. It sometimes happens that these unfortunate tenants paid their rent twice over, once to the middleman and once to the head landlord. The characteristics of a middleman were civility to his superiors and tyranny towards his inferiors. The poor detested this race of being. In speaking to them, however, they always used the most abject language and the most humble tone and posture. Please your honour, and please your honour's honour, they knew must be repeated as a charm at the beginning and end of every equivocating exculpatory or supplicatory sentence, and they was much more alert to doffing their caps to these new men than those of what they call good old families. A witty carpenter once termed these middlemen journeyman gentlemen. Oh, what an horrible class of being to be. Yeah. The agent one of your middlemen, who ground the face of the poor and can never bear a man with an hat upon his head. He ferreted the tenants out of their lives, not a week without a call for money, drafts upon drafts from Sir Kit, but I laid it all to the fault of the agent, for, says I, what can Sir Kit do with so much cash and be a single man? But still it went. Rents must be all paid up to the day, and afore, no allowance for improving tenants, no consideration for those who had built upon their farms. No sooner was a lease out, but the land was advertised to the highest bidder. All the old tenants turned out, and they had spent their substance in the open trust of a renewal from the landlord. All was now set at the highest penny to a parcel of poor wretches who meant to run away, and did so after taking 2 crops out of the ground. Then finding down the year's rents coming into fashion, anything for the ready penny, and with all this in presence of the agent and the driver, there was no such thing as standing it. I said nothing, for I had a regard for the family, but I walked about thinking if his honour Sir Kit, long may he live to reign over us, knew all this, it would go hard with him. He'd see us righted, not that I had anything for my own share to complain of. The agent were always very civil to me when he come down into the country and took a great deal of notice of my son Jason Quirk. Though he be my own son, I must say he was a good scholar from his birth, and a very cute lad. I thought to make him a priest, but he did better for himself, seeing how he was a good clerk as any in the county. The agent gave him his rent accounts to copy, which he did first of all for the pleasure of obliging the gentleman, and would take nothing at all for his trouble, but were always proud to serve the family. By and by, a good farm bought down in us to the east fell into his honour's hands, and my son put in a proposal for it. Why shouldn't he as well as another? The proposals all went over to the matter of the bar, who know him no more of the land than the child unborn, only having once been out grousing on it before he went to England, and the value of lands, as the agent informed him, falling every year in Ireland. His honour wrote over in all haste a letter saying he left it all to the agent, and he must set it as well as he could to the best bidder, be sure, and send him over £200. By return of post with this, the agent gave me an in, and I spoke a good word for my son, and gave out in the country that nobody need not bid against us. So his proposal was just a thing, and he a good tenant, and he got a promise of an abatement in the rent after the first year for advancing the half year's rent at signing the lease, which wanted to complete the agent's £200 by the return of the post, with all which my master wrote back he was well satisfied. About this time we learned from the agent, as a great secret, how the money went so fast, and the reason of the thick coming of the master's drafts. He were a little too fond of play and bath, as they say, with no place for a young man of his fortune. But there were so many of his own countrymen, two haunting him up and down, day and night, who had nothing to lose. At last, at Christmas, the agent wrote over to stop the draft, for he could raise no more money on bond or mortgage, or from the tenants or anyhow, nor had he any more to lend himself, and desired at the same time the decline of the agency for the future, wishing Sir Kit his health and happiness, and the compliments of the season, for I saw the letter before ever it was sealed, and my son copied it. When the answer came, there were a new turn in affairs, and the agent were turned out, and my son Jason, who had corresponded privately with his honour occasionally on business, were forthwith desired by his honour to take the accounts into his own hands, and look them over till further orders. They were a very spirited lad, to be sure. Sir Kit sent his service and the compliments of the season, in return to the agents, and he would fight him with pleasure tomorrow or any day for sending him such a letter, if he were born a gentleman, which he was sorry, for both their sex, to find too late he was not. Then, in a private postscript, he condescended to tell us that all would be speedily settled to his satisfaction, and we should turn over a new leaf, for we were going to be married in a fortnight, the grandest heiress in England, and had only immediate occasion at present for £200, as he would not choose to touch his lady's fortune for travelling expenses home to Castle Rackrent, where he intended to be, wind and weather permitting, early in the next month, and desired fires and the house to be painted and the new building to go on as fast as possible for the reception of him and his lady before the time. With several words beside in the letter, which we could not make out, because, God bless him, he wrote in such a flurry. My heart warmed to my new lady when I read this. I was almost afraid it were too good news to be true, but the girls tried a scouring, and well they did. We soon saw his marriage in the paper to a lady with I don't know how many tens of thousands of pounds to her fortune. Then I watched the post office for his landing, and the news came to my son of his and the bride being in Dublin and on the way home to Rackrent Gap. We had bonfires all over the country, expecting him down the next day, and we had his coming of age still to celebrate, which he had not time to do properly before he left the country. Therefore a great ball expected, and great doings upon his coming, as it were, fresh to take possession of his ancestors' estate. I never shall forget the day he come home. We had waited and waited all day long till 11 o'clock at night, and I was thinking of sending the boy to lock the gates and giving them up for the night, when there come a carriage thundering up to the great hall door. I got the first sight of the bride. When the carriage door opened, just as she had her foot on the step, I held the flam full in her face to light her, at which she shuts her eyes, and I have a full view of the rest of her, and greatly shocked I was. By that light she was little better than a blackamoor, and seemed crippled, that were only sitting so long in the chariot. "You kindly welcome to Castle Rackrent, my lady," says I, recollecting who she was. "Did your honour hear of the bonfires?" His honour spoke ne'er a word, nor so much as handed her up the steps. He looked to me no more like himself than nothing at all. I know I took him for the skeleton of his honour. I was not sure what to say next, to one or t'other, but seeing she were a stranger in a foreign country, I thought it but right to speak cheerfully to her, so I went back again to the bonfires. "My lady," says I, as she crossed the hall, "there would have been 50 times as many, but for fear of the horses and frightening your ladyship. Jason and I forbid them, please your honour." With that she looked at me a little bewildered. "Will I have a firelight in the stateroom tonight?" was the next question I put to her. But ne'er a word she answered, so I concluded she could not speak a word of English, and was from foreign parts. The short and long of it was, I couldn't tell what to make of her, so I left her to herself and went straight down to the servants' hall to learn something for certain about her. Secret's own man were tired, but the groom set him to talking at last, and we had it all out before ever I closed my eyes that night. The bride might well be a great fortune. She were a Jewish by all accounts, who were famous for their great riches. I had never seen any of that tribe or nation before, and could only gather that she spoke a strange kind of English of her own, that she could not abide pork or sausages, and went neither to church nor mass. Mercy upon his honour's poor soul, thought I. What will become of him and his and all of us with this heretic blackamoor at the head of the Castle Rackrent estate? I never slept a wink at all that night for thinking of it, but before the servants I put my pipe in my mouth and kept my mind into myself, for I had great regard for the family, and after this, when strange gentlemen's servants come to the house, and we began to talk about the bride, I took care to put the best foot foremost, and passed her for a nabob in the kitchen, which accounted for her dark complexion and everything. The very morning after they came over, I saw how things was, plain enough, between Sir Kit and my lady. They was walking together arm in arm after breakfast, looking at the new building and the improvements. "Old Thaddy," said my master, just as he used to, "how do you do?" "Very well, thank your honour's honour," said I, but I saw he were not well pleased, and my heart were in my mouth as I walked along after him. "Is the large room damp, Thaddy?" said his honour. "Ah, damp, your honour, how should it be but as dry as a bone," says I, "after all the fires we have kept in it day and night. It's the barrack rooms your honour's talking on." "And what is a barrack room, pray, my dear?" The first words are... "And what is a barrack room, pray, my dear?" The first words I ever heard out of my lady's lips. "No matter, my dear," said he, and went on talking to me. A shame like I should witness her ignorance. To be sure, to hear her talk, one might have taken her for an innocent, for it was, "What's this, Sir Kit?" and "What's that, Sir Kit?" all the way we went. To be sure, Sir Kit had enough to do to answer her. "And what do you call that, Sir Kit?" says she. "That looks like a pile of black bricks. Pray, Sir Kit." "My turf stack, my dear," said my master, and bit his lip. "Where you live, my lady, all you know not to know a turf stack when you see it," thought I, but said nothing. Then by and by she takes out her glass and begins spying over the country. "And what's all that black swamp out yonder, Sir Kit?" says she. "My bog, my dear," says he, and went on a whistling. "It's a very ugly prospect, my dear. It's a very ugly prospect, my dear," says she. "You don't see it, my dear," says he, "but we've planted it out, and when the trees grow up in summer time," says he. "Where are the trees?" says she, my dear, still looking through the glass. "You're blind, my dear," says he. "What are those under your eyes?" "These shrubs," says she. "Trees," says he. "Maybe they are what you call trees in Ireland, my dear," says she. "They are not a yard high, are they?" They were planted out but last year, my lady. They were planted out but last year, my lady, says I. Oh, there is an outbreak. Right. I never know if the ads actually play for the old outbreak, but I try to take a pause during it because I don't want people to miss out. So, if you're not in the outbreak, I guess we're taking a small break here for, I guess we can have a drink of water, and I do a little talk on the text. And same, I suppose, if you're watching the VOD. So, we've got another new lord who is just as much of a wastrel of money as the last one, it would seem. Well, maybe not quite so much. Well, no, that's not fair. The last one wasn't a wastrel of money, he was very bad with it. But yeah, I mean, things isn't going well. He's defined by being a wastrel of money, this one. That seems to be his main thing, calling for it and pushing through the landlord and abusing the tenants. Not that our man would say so, for he's very loyal to the family, as he keeps repeating. But yeah, what else is there to be noted about this then? Marrying a Jew at this, well, I mean, in the 1800s already standing pretty scandalous, I imagine, but at this point in time in history, which I don't know exactly when this would have been about, but probably 1700s at the latest, was rightly very scandalous, especially to small folk like Thaddy who aren't familiar with it. Still, there are some derogatory comments here about the people, but what you call it? Yeah, nothing atypical for the time, unfortunately. Still, Thaddy's getting on with it pretty well, comparatively. He's just grinning and bearing it and getting by. Mostly worried about the religion, which is, I suppose, the honestest way to be disparaging of another people. But yeah. That breaks just about over, so I'll have another quick drink of water. This is a bit of an odd one, this text. It's very thick and the grammar is odd with the with the little asides. It feels much longer than it is. We're only about 20 pages into it, and 60 more to go, so we'll press on. I'll go back a bit because I think I've read something to the outbreak. Yeah. You're blind, my dear, says he. What are those under your eyes? These shrubs, says she. Trees, says he. Maybe they are what you call trees in Ireland, my dear, says she. But they are not a yard high, are they? They was planted out but last year, my lady, says I, to soften matters between them. For I saw she was going the way to make his honour mad with her. They are very well grown for their age, and you'll not see the bog of Allibally-Carrico Shornlin at all through the scree once the leaves come out. But, my lady, you must not quarrel with any part or parcel of Allibally-Carrico Shorlin's Alaka Shorlin, for you don't know how many hundreds of years that same bit of bog has been in the family. We would not part with the bog of Allibally-Carrico Shorlin upon no account at all. It cost the late Sir Martag £200 good to defend this title to it, and boundaries against the O'Learys, who cut a road through it. Now one would have thought this would have been hint enough for my lady, but she felt the laughing like one out of their right mind, and made me say the name of the bog over for her, to get it by heart a dozen times. Then she must ask me how to spell it, and what were the meaning of it in English, so I kept standing by whistling all the while. I verily believe she laid the cornerstone for all her future misfortunes at that very instant. But I said no more, only looked at Sir Kit. There was no balls, no dinners, no doings. The country were all disappointed. Sir Kit's gentleman said, in a whisper to me, "They're all my lady's own fault, because she was so obstinate about the cross." "What cross?" says I. "Is it about her being an heretic?" "Oh, no such matter," says he. "My master does not mind her heresies, but her diamond cross. It's worth I can't tell you how much, and she has thousands of English pounds concealed in diamonds about her, which she as good as promised to give up to my master before he married. But now she won't part with any of them, and she must take the consequences." Her honeymoon, at least her Irish honeymoon, was scarcely well over when his honour one morning said to me, "Daddy, buy me a pig." And then the sausages were ordered, and here were the first open breaking out of my lady's troubles. My lady come down herself into the kitchen to speak to the cook about the sausages, and as I'd never to see them more at her table. Now my master had ordered them, and my lady knew that. The cook took my lady's part because she never come down in the kitchen, and were young and innocent in housekeeping, which raised her pity. Besides, said she, at her own table, surely my lady should order and disorder what she pleases. But the cook soon changed her note, for my master made it a principle to have the sausages, and swore her for a Jew herself, till he drove her fairly out of the kitchen. Then for fear of her place, and because he threatened that my lady should give her no discharge without the sausages, she gave up. And from that day forward, always sausages or bacon or pig meat in some shape or other went up to the table, upon which my lady shut herself up in her own room, and my master said that she might stay there. With an oath, and to make sure of her, he turned the key in the door, and kept it ever after in his pocket. We none of us ever saw or heard her speak for 7 years after that. There's a little note on the never heard her speak after 7 years. This part of the history of the Rackrent family can scarcely be thought credible, but in justice to honest study, it is hoped the reader will recollect the history of the celebrated Lady Cathcart's conjugal imprisonment. The editor was acquainted with Colonel Maguire, Lady Cathcart's husband. He has lately seen and questioned the maidservant who lived with Colonel Maguire during the time of Lady Cathcart's imprisonment. Her ladyship were locked up in her own house for many years, during which period her husband was visited by the neighbouring gentry, and it was his regular custom at dinner to send his compliments to Lady Cathcart, informing that the company had the honour to drink to her ladyship's health, and begging to know whether there were anything at the table she would like to eat. The answer always, Lady Cathcart's compliments, and she has everything she wants. An instance of honesty in a poor Irishwoman deserves to be recorded. Lady Cathcart had some remarkably fine diamonds which she had concealed from her husband, and which she was anxious to get out of the house, lest he should discover them. She had neither servant nor friend to whom she did entrust them, but she observed a poor beggar woman who used to come to the house. She spoke to her from the window of the room in which she was confined. The woman promised to do what she desired, and Lady Cathcart threw a parcel containing the jewels to her. The poor woman carried them to the person whom they were directed, and several years afterwards, when Lady Cathcart recovered her liberty, she retrieved her diamonds safely. At Colonel Maguire's death, her ladyship were released. The editor, with this year, saw a gentleman who accompanied her to England after her husband's death. When she first were told of his death, she imagined that the news were not true, and that were told only with intention of deceiving her. At his death she had scarcely clothes sufficient to cover her. She wore a red wig, looked scared, and her understatement seemed stupefied. She said she scarcely knew one human creature from another. Her imprisonment lasted above 20 years. These circumstances may appear strange to an English reader. There is no danger in the present times that any individual should exercise such tyranny as Colonel Maguire's with impunity. The power being now all in the hands of governments, and there being no possibility of obtaining from Parliament an act of indemnity for any cruelties. Well, that's not pleasant. Well, none of us ever saw or heard her speak for 7 years after that. He carried a dinner himself. Then his honours had a great deal of company to dine with him, and balls in the house, and was as gay and gallant and as much himself as before he was married. And at dinner he always drank my Lady Rackrent's good health, and so did the company. He sent out always a servant with his compliments to my Lady Rackrent, and the company would drink in her ladyship's health, and beg to know if there were anything at the table he might send her. And the man come back, after the sham errand, with my Lady Rackrent's compliments, and she was very much obliged to Sir Kit. She did not wish for anything, but drank of the company's health. The country, to be sure, talked and wondered at my lady's being shut up, but nobody chose to interfere or ask any impertinent questions, for I knew my master were a man very apt to give short answers himself, and likely to call a man out for it afterwards. He was a famous shot, had killed his man before he come of age, and nobody scarce dare look at him whilst at Bath. Sir Kit's character was so well known in the country that he lived in peace and quietness thereafter, and were a great favourite with the ladies, especially when in process of time, in the 5th year of her consignment, my Lady Stopgap fell ill, and took entirely to her bed, and he gave out that she was now skin and bone, and could not last through the winter. In this he had 2 physicians' opinions to back him, for now he called in 2 physicians for her, and tried all his arts to get the diamond cross from her on her deathbed, and to get her to make a will in his favour of her separate possessions. But she was there too tough for him. He used to swear at her behind her back, after kneeling to her in her face, and call her in the presence of his gentleman his stiff-necked Israelite. Though before he married her, the same gentleman told me he used to call her, how he could bring it out I really don't know, my pretty Jessica. To be sure, it must have been hard for her to guess what sort of husband he reckoned to make her. And she relied on all expectation on her deathbed of a broken heart. I could not but pity her, as she was a Jewish, and considering too it were no fault of hers to be taken with my master so young as she was at the time at Bath, and so fine a gentleman as Sir Kit when he courted her, and considering too after all they had heard and seen of him as an husband, there were now no less than 3 ladies in our county talked of for his second wife, all at daggers drawn with each other, as his gentlemen swore at the balls for Sir Kit for their partner. I could not but think themselves bewitched, but they all reasoned with themselves that Sir Kit would make a good husband to any Christian, but Jewish, I suppose, and especially as he was now a reformed rake. And it were not known how my lady's fortune was settled in our will, nor how the castle Rackrent estate were all mortgaged, and bonds out against him, for he was never cured of his game and tricks. That was the only fault he had, God bless him. Just going to pause here to acknowledge that is genuinely awful. That's a dreadful thing to have happened to anyone. Well, I believe this is a fictional account. I'm not so sure about the one in the footnote. And also to point out that he's interesting how Thaddy here is he points out and recognises that it's an horrible thing that happens and that it's all bad, but he doesn't pretend to what's the term? He doesn't argue against the family for it, which is interesting. It's a classic narrative device of the sort of how'd you say, damning by faint praise sort of thing. No, not a position I think anyone would like to be in. And sadly a position that is all too easy for someone to fall into still these days. When you have a person of a lower social class or a low social group as well, and someone of an higher social group, especially in a sort of formal marriage at the time, and when he essentially owned that woman, and no one would speak out in her defence. A terrible tragedy. And of course we see him as we see him pretty clearly as a monster. Despite that, he's saying that his gaming tricks were his only fault. Still, no. But yeah, I think it's just worth pointing out that obviously this is an horrible thing, and it's an old novel and an historical tale even by that. And that I think that it's clear that the text agrees with us, though it doesn't say so in as many words. Anyway. My lady had a sort of fit, and it was given out she was dead by mistake. This brought things to a sad crisis for my poor master. One of the 3 ladies shewed his letters to her brother, and claimed his promise, whilst another did the same. I don't mention names. Sir Kit, in his defence, said he would meet any man who dared to question his conduct, and as to the ladies, they must settle it among them who was to be his second, and his third, and his fourth, while his first was still alive, to his mortification and theirs. Upon this, as upon all former occasions, he had the voice of the country with him, on account of the great spirit and propriety he acted with. He met and shot the first lady's brother. The next day he called out the second, who had a wooden leg, and their place of meeting by appointment being in a new ploughed field, the wooden-legged man stuck fast in it. Sir Kit, seeing his situation, with great candour, fired his pistol over his head, upon which the second interposed, and convinced the parties there had been a slight misunderstanding between them. Thereupon they shook hands cordially and went home to dinner together. This gentleman, to show the world how they stood together, and by the advice of the friends of both parties to re-establish his sister's injured reputation, went out with Sir Kit as his second, and carried his message the next day to the last of his adversaries. And they saw him in such fine spirits as that day. He went out. Sure enough, he were within aim's ace of getting quite handsomely of all his enemies. But unluckily, after hitting the toothpick out of his adversary's finger and thumb, he received a ball in his vital part, and were brought home, in a little better than an hour after the affair, speechless, on an hand barrow, to my lady. He got the key out of his pocket, the first thing we did, and my son Jason ran to unlock the barrack room, where my lady had been shut up for 7 years, located with a fatal accident. The surprise bereaved her of her senses at first, nor would she believe that we were putting some new trick upon her to entrap her out of her jewels for a great while, till Jason bethought himself of taking her to the window, and showed her the men bringing Sir Kit up the avenue upon the hand barrow, which had immediately the desired effect, for directly she burst into tears, and pulling her across from her bosom, she kissed it with as great a devotion as e'er I witnessed, and lifting up her eyes to heaven, I had some ejaculation which none present heard. But I take the sense of it to be she returned thanks for this unexpected interposition in her favour, when she had least reason to expect it. Well, I guess all's well that ends well. Must admit, I do like the little bit about the fellow with the wooden leg getting stuck in the plough field. Just it's a very funny little detail, but also it does give a little bit more complexity to the kit, because he doesn't just shoot him out, which he very could have. He shoots above his head to make the point, and rather than getting shot for his his generosity, he's kind of rewarded for it in that the man becomes his friend and stands as his second, when he is then shot the next day just in an unrelated duel. Yeah. My master were greatly lamented. There were no life in him when we lifted him off the barrow, so we were laid out immediately and waked the same night. The country were all in uproar about him, and not a soul but cried shame upon his murderer. He would have been hanged surely if he could have been brought to his trial whilst the gentlemen in the country were up about it, but he very prudently withdrew himself to the continent before the affair were made public. As for the young lady who was the immediate cause of the fatal accident, however innocently, she could never shew her head after at the balls in the country, or any place, and by the advice of her friends and physicians, she were ordered soon after to Bath, where it was expected, if anywhere on this side of the grave, she would meet with the recovery of her health and lost peace of mind. As proof of his great popularity, I need only add that there were a song made upon my master's untimely death in the newspapers, which were in everybody's mouth, singing up and down through the country, even down to the mountains, only 3 days after his unhappy exit. He was also greatly bemoaned at the Curragh, where his cattle were well known, and all who had taken up his bets formerly were particularly inconsolable for his loss to society. He stood solid at the cant in the greatest price they are known in the country. His favourite horses were chiefly disposed of among his particular friends, who would give any price for them for his sake, but no ready money were required by the new heir, who wished not to displease any of the gentlemen of the neighbourhood just upon his coming and settle amongst them. So long a credit were given where requisite, and the cash had never been gathered in from that day to this. But the return of my lady, she got surprisingly well after my master's decease. No sooner were it known for certain that he were dead, than all the gentlemen within 20 miles of us come in a body, as it were, to see my lady at liberty, and to protest against their confinement, which now they for the first time understood were against their own consent. The ladies too were as attentive as possible, striving who should be foremost with the morning visits, and they that saw the diamonds spoke very handsomely of them, but thought it a pity they were not bestowed, if it had so pleased God, upon a lady who would have become them better. All these civilities wrought little with my lady, for she had taken an unaccountable prejudice against the country, and everything belonging to it, and was so partial to her native land that after parting with the cook, which she did immediately upon my master's decease, I never knew her easy one instant, night or day, but when she were packing up to leave us. And she meant to make any stay in Ireland, I stood a great chance of being a great favourite with her. When she found I understood the weathercock, she would always find some pretence to be talking to me, and asking me which way the wind blew, and was it likely, did I think, to continue fair for England. But when I saw she had made up her mind to spend the rest of her days upon her own income and jewels in England, I considered her quite as a foreigner, and not all any longer as part of the family. She gave no vails to the servants at Castle Rackrent at parting, notwithstanding the old proverb of as rich as a Jew, which she, being a Jewish, they built upon with reason. But from first to last, she brought nothing but misfortunes among us. And if it had not been all along with her, his honour Sir Kit would have been now alive, in all appearance. A diamond cross was, they say, at the bottom of it all, and it were a shame for her, being his wife, not to show more duty and to have given it up when he condescended to ask so often for such a bit of trifle in his distress, especially when he all along made it no secret he married for money. But we will not display another thought upon her. This much I thought it to lay upon my conscience to say in justice to my poor master's memory. 'Tis an ill wind that blows nobody no good. The same wind that took the Jew Lady Rackrent over to England brought over the new heir at Castle Rackrent. Here let me pause for breath in my story, for though I had a great regard for every member of the family, yet without compare Sir Connolly, commonly called for short amongst his friends Sir Condy Rackrent, were ever my great favourite, and indeed the most universally beloved man I had ever seen, or heard of, not excepting his great ancestor Sir Patrick, to whose memory he, among other instances of generosity, erected an handsome marble stone at the church of Castle Rackrent, setting forth in large letters his age, birth, parentage, and many other virtues, concluding with a compliment so justly due, that Sir Patrick Rackrent lived and died a monument of old Irish hospitality. And there is a pause there, which is... it's not a chapter necessarily, but there's a new heading for a separate section, so I'll take that as a chapter. And have a quick drink to wet my throat. And do a little bit more talking. Well, that was probably quite an inopportune time to pause, given that we have just done a little bit more talking over than most of it. Yeah, what's there to say about this? I mean, obviously we do have, justice coming good in the end. It's pretty rough that it come out, but yeah, it's rough that it turned out that way. But she did come out the better in the end, and he met his fair end. Obviously there's some disparagement given the Jews here, but it's pretty clear in much of the facts of the thing that she's in the right, and that the real criticism is against Sir Kit, though he is only openly praised by the our dear anastatic. But what else? Also, something about the old, like the diamonds bothers me a bit. I mean, like the idea of a woman having some treasure is, you know, understandable. But the idea of a diamond cross for someone who's not of the Christian faith seems an odd treasure to own. I do wonder if that's in direct reference to something, whether there's like a particular artifact or article of the Jewish faith that it would be in reference to, representing, or if it's just a sort of generic treasure to be had. Or maybe even the opposite. Maybe it is a treasure that is implied to be in the wrong hands, which is why it's being represented so. And actually, this is more critical of Lady Rackrent than I thought. I can't really say. I'm lacking some context here. But yeah, we have an interesting little lineage. Seems pretty clear that the Rackrents are lending themselves quickly to ruin, with Sir Patrick giving good feasts and giving high feasts and burning his money, and Murtagh continually burning money on pointless and frivolous lawsuits, and then Kit unable to raise anything and taxing his peasantry to the extreme, and marrying for money that he never gets his hand on. A pretty typical in the decline of the nobility, but interesting enough. At the same time, they do largely seem, I was about to say they seem largely to be popular, but Murtagh wasn't. Murtagh was constantly in dispute with people, so, you know, fair enough. But Kit and Patrick both seem very popular. Patrick, you know, universally, but Kit also, like, I mean, for all his cruelties and sort of misdemeanours and his gambling habits, he was a popular man. Which, I mean, I guess a gambler who keeps losing is a very popular man generally. But he had people over, he had balls, and he's all this, and his death was so controversial that the man who killed him, though it being a lawful duel that Kit killed many men and was celebrated for, he had to flee the country. And the woman over whom we fought had her life, at least socially, ruined, which it does bespeak a certain popularity of the man. It's an odd thing, really. I think there's something to be said of the tradition of duels, and there's a lot of interest to be had around it, like the idea of these, you know, like basically social combats, right? Or I guess, yeah, social combats, right? The whole point of a duel is to settle affairs and to decide right and wrong. And a man can become very popular for being a good duelist. I mean, mostly because I suspect you wouldn't want to get on his wrong side, but in the losing and in the dying, it didn't make him less popular, so it wasn't exactly fear that made him popular. I don't know. There's something odd about it. Kit's like on the face of it, I sort of want to see Kit as like a sort of sneering villain, you know. Imprisoned his wife, murdered a bunch of people about it, and you know, taxed his tenants very harshly and spent all his money on nothing. But at the same time, there must be something more to him because of the way the people talk. I don't just mean Thaddy, who obviously we see as a biased narrator, but he doesn't seem to be a liar in many, like the direct accounts at least. He just paints things in a certain light. So when he says that, you know, the county were very despondent and that he had this song and all this, it makes you think it's true. Maybe not. Maybe he's lying more than I give him credit for. But I don't know. There's depth to this. And I'm dropping frames, Lord. Right. Actually, let's take a moment to see how far we are in the text, shall we? So, from the start of the thing... So we're about 22 pages in, so a little over a quarter through. We'll definitely shoot for half today, I think. I don't think it's heavy enough that we're not going to get through half of it today. I don't think we'll get through the whole thing. I'm enjoying it well enough, but it's a very odd one. I don't know. We'll see how we get on. But I think at least another hour of this. For those who are keeping your thumbs careful. We'll get to the next hour and then we'll reconvene, I think. Continuation of the memoirs of the Rackrent family. History of Sir Connolly Rackrent. Sir Connolly Rackrent, by the grace of God, heir at law of the Castle Rackrent estate, were a remote branch of the family. Born a little or no fortune of his own, he were bred to the bar, out which having many friends to push him, and no means natural abilities of his own, he doubtless would, in process of time, if he could have borne the drudgery of that study, have been rapidly made King's Counsel at the least. The things was disposed of otherwise, and he never went circuit but twice, and then made no figure for want of a fee, and being unable to speak in public, he received his education chiefly in the College of Dublin, but before it come the years of discretion, lived in the country in a small but slated house within view of the end of the avenue. I remember him barefooted and headed, running through the street of O'Shaughnessy town, and playing at pitch and toss, ball, marbles, and what not, with the boys of the town, amongst whom my son Jason were a great favourite with him. As for me, you were ever my white-headed boy. Ooh, there's a note there. White-headed boy is used by the Irish as an expression of fondness. It is upon a par with the English term crony. It is at a loss for the derivation of this term. It was ever my white-headed boy. Often's a time when I would call at his father's, where I were always made welcome. He would slip down on me in the kitchen and love to sit on my knee whilst I told him stories of the family and the blood from which he was sprung, and how he might look forward if the then present man should die without childhood, to be at the head of the Castle Rackrent estate. This would then spoke quiet and clear at random to please the child, but it pleased heaven to accomplish my prophecy afterwards, which gave him a great opinion of my judgment in business. He went to a little grammar school with many others, my son amongst the rest, who were in his class, and not a little useful to him in his book learning, which he acknowledged with gratitude ever after. These rudiments of his education thus completed, he got on horseback, to which exercise he were ever addicted, and he used to gallop over the country, whilst yet but a slip of a boy, under the care of Sir Kit's huntsmen, who were very fond of him, and often lent him his gun, and took him out with a shooting under his own eye. By these means he became well acquainted and popular among the poor and the neighbours, in the neighbourhood early. But they're not a cabinet which he had not stopped some morning or other, along with the huntsman, to drink a glass of burnt whisky out of an eggshell, to do him good, and warm his heart, and drive the cold out of his stomach. The old people always told him he was a great likeness of Sir Patrick, which made him first have an ambition to take after him, as far as his fortune should allow. He left us when of an age to enter the college, and there completed his education at 19th year. For as he were not born to an estate, his friends thought it incumbent on them to give him the best education which could be had for love or money. A great deal of money consequently was spent upon him at college and Temple. He was very little altered for the worse by what he saw there at the great world. When he come down into the country to pay us a visit, we thought him just the same man as ever, hand and glove with everyone, as far from our, though not without his own proper share of family pride, as any man you ever see. Latterly, seeing how Sir Kit and the Jewish lived together, and that there were no one between him and the Castle Rackrent estate, he neglected to apply to the law as much as we expected of him, and secretly many of the tenants and others advanced him cash upon his note of hand value received, promising bargains of leases and lawful interest should he ever come into the estate. All this was kept a great secret, for fear of the present man hearing of it, should take it into his head to take ill of poor Connolly, and so should cut him off forever by levying a fine and suffering a recovery to dock the entail. Sir Murto would have been the man for that, but Sir Kit were too much taken up philandering to consider the law in this case, or any other. These practices I have mentioned accounted for the state of these affairs. I mean Sir Condy's upon his coming into the Castle Rackrent estate. He could not command a penny of his first year's income, which, and keeping no accounts in the great sight of company, he did, with many other causes too numerous to mention, were the origin of his distresses. My son Jason, who was now an established agent and knew everything, explained the matters out of the face to Sir Connolly, and made him sensible of his embarrassed situation. With a great nominal rent roll, it were almost all paid away in interest, which, being for convenience suffered to run on, soon doubled the principal, and Sir Condy were obliged to pass new bonds for the interest, now grown principal, and so on. Whilst this were going on, my son, requiring to be paid for his trouble and many years' service in the family gratis, and for Sir Condy, not willing to take his affairs into his own hands, or to look them even in the face, he gave my son a bargain of some acres, which fell out of lease at a reasonable rent. Jason set the land as soon as his lease was sealed to one of the tenants to make the rent, and got 200 a year profit rent, which were little enough considering his long agency. He bought the land at 12 years' purchase, 2 years afterwards, when Sir Condy were pushed for money on an execution, and were at the same time allowed for his improvements thereon. There was a sort of hunting lodge upon the estate, convenient to my son Jason's land, which he had his eye upon about this time, and he were a little jealous of Sir Condy, who talked of setting it to a stranger who had just come into the country. Captain Moneygall was the man. He was son and heir to the Moneygalls of Mount Juliet's Town, who had a great estate in the next county to ours, and my master were loath to disoblige the young gentleman, whose heart was set upon the lodge. So we wrote him back that the lodge were at his service, and if he would honour him with his company at Castle Rackrent, they could ride over together some morning and look at it before signing the lease. Accordingly, the captain came over to us, and he and Sir Connolly grew the greatest friends ever you see, and were forever out and shooting or hunting together, and were very merry in the evenings. And Sir Condy were invited, of course, to Mount Juliet's Town, and the family intimacy that had been in Sir Patrick's time were now recollected. For nothing would serve Sir Condy, but he must have 3 times a week at the least with his new friends, which grieved me, who knew by the captain's groom and gentlemen how they talked of him at Mount Juliet's Town, making him quite, as one may say, a laughing-stock and a butt for the old company. But they were soon cured of that by an accident that surprised them not a little as it did me. There were a bit of a scrawl found upon the waiting maid of old Mr. Moneygall's youngest daughter, Miss Isabella, that laid open the hole, and her father, they say, was like one out of his right mind, and swore it the last thing he ever should have thought of when he invited my master to his house, that his daughter should think of such a match. But their talk signified not a straw, for as Miss Isabella's maid reported, our young mistress was fallen over head and ears in love with Sir Condy, from the first time that ever her brother brought him into the house to dinner. The servant who waited that day behind my master's chair were the first who knew it. As he says, it was hard to believe him, for he did not tell till a great while afterwards. But however, it's likely enough, as the thing turned out, that he was not far out of the way. But towards the middle of dinner, as he says, they were talking of stage plays, having a playhouse, and being great play actors at Mount Juliet's Town. And Miss Isabella turns short to my master and says, "Have you seen the playbill, Sir Condy?" "No, I have not," says he. "Then more shame for you." "Then more shame for you," said the captain, her brother, "not to know that my sister is to play Juliet tonight, who plays it better than any woman on or off the stage in all Ireland." "I am very happy to hear it," says Sir Condy, and then the matter dropped for the present. But Sir Condy all this time, and a great while afterwards, were a terrible nonplus, for he had no liking not he to stage plays, nor to Miss Isabella either. To his mind, as it come out, a bowl of whisky punch at home, his little Judy McQuirk, who were a daughter to a sister's son of mine, were worth 20 of Miss Isabella. He had seen her often when he stopped at her father's cabin to drink whisky out of the eggshell, out of hunting before it come into the estate, and as she gave out, were under something like a promise of marriage to her. Anyhow, I could not but pity my poor master, who was so bothered between them, and he an easy-hearted man that could not disoblige nobody. God bless him. To be sure, it were not his place to behave ungenerous to Miss Isabella, who had disobliged all her relations for his sake, as he remarked, and then she were locked up in her chamber and forbid to think of him any more, which raised her spirit, because his family was, as he observed, as good as theirs at any rate, and the Rackrent's a suitable match for the Moneygalls any day in the year. all which were true enough, but it grieved me to see that upon the strength of all this, Sir Condy would grow more in the mind and carry off Miss Isabella to Scotland, in spite of her relations, as she desired. It's all over with our poor Judy, said I, with an heavy sigh, making bold to speak to him one night when he were a little cheerful, and standing in the servants' hall all alone with me, as were often his custom. Not at all, said he. I was never fonder of Judy than at this present speaking, and to prove it to you, said he, and he took from my hand an halfpenny, change that I had just got, along with my tobacco, and to prove it to you, Thaddy, says he, is a toss-up with me between which I shall marry this minute, her or Miss Moneygall, of Mount Juliet's Town. Moneygall of Mount Juliet's Town's daughter. So it is. Ah, boo, boo, says I, making light of it, to see what he would go on to next. There is a little appendix here. Boo, boo, an exclamation equivalent to pshaw or nonsense. So I'm making light of it to see what we do next. Your Honour's joking, to be sure. There's no compare between our poor Judy and Miss Isabella. There's a great fortune, they say. I'm not a man to mind a fortune, nor never was, says Sir Condy proudly, whatever her friends may say. And to make short of it, says he, I'm come to a determination upon the spot. With that he swore such a terrible oath as made me cross myself. No, as made me cross myself, the Roman Catholics is the only note there. And by this book, said he, snatching up my ballad book, mistaking it for my prayer book, which lay in the window. And by this book, said he, and by all the books that ever were shut and opened, it's come to a toss-up with me, and I'll stand or fall by the toss, and so, Daddy, hand me over that pin out of the inkhorn. Another note for pin. Red pen, it formerly was vulgarly pronounced pin in Ireland, dear Lord. And he makes a quick cross on the smooth side of the halfpenny. Judy McQuirk, says he, her mark. 2 notes. Her mark. It was the custom in Ireland for those who could not write out to make a cross to stand for their signature, as was formerly the practice of our English monarchs. The editor inserts the facsimile of an Irish mark, which may hereafter be valuable to a judicious antiquary. In bonds or notes signed in this manner, a witness is required as the name is frequently written by him or her. And the mark is just the name with her and her above it and mark below it, and the X in the middle with all 4 of them. Which, I mean, I'm familiar with the custom because it was something often done by sailors and men signed for the Navy, so I've come across it before. God bless him, his hand were a little unsteady by all the whisky punch he had taken, but it was plain to see his heart with a poor Judy. My outrulers won in my mouth when I saw the halfpenny up in the air, but I said nothing at all. And when it come down, I was glad I had kept myself to myself. For to be sure now, it were all over with poor Judy. Judy's out of luck, said I, striving to laugh. I am out of luck, said he. I never saw a man look so cast down. He took up the halfpenny off the flag and walked away quite soberly, like with a shock. Now, there's easy a man as you would think, as in any of the wide world. There were no such thing as making a man easy, to making an unsay one of these sorts of vows, which he had learned reference for when young, as I well remember teaching him to toss up for bogberries on my knee. There's a little thing here for the word vow. It has been maliciously and unjustly hinted that the lower classes of the people in Ireland pay but little regard to oaths. It is certain that some oaths or vows have great power over their minds. Sometimes they swear they will be revenged on some of their neighbours. This is an oath they are never known to break. But what is infinitely more extraordinary and unaccountable, they sometimes make a vow against whisky. These vows is usually limited to a short time. A woman who has had a drunken husband is most fortunate if she can prevail upon him to go to the priest and make a vow against whisky for a year or a month or a week or a day. That doesn't seem like it's actually meant about vernacular or anything, it's just a little bit mocking the Irish. Which... I'll take a moment to have a quick swallow of water. As I well remember teaching him to toss up for bogberries on my knee. So I saw the affair was as good as settled between him and Miss Isabella, and I had no more to say but to wish her joy, which I did the week afterwards upon a return from Scotland with my poor master. My new lady were young, as might be supposed to a lady that had been carried off by her own consent to Scotland, but I could only see her as at the first through her veil, which from bashfulness or fashion she kept over her face. And I to walk through all this crowd of people, my dearest love, said she to Sir Connolly, meaning us servants and tenants who had gathered at the back gate. My dear, said Sir Connolly, there's nothing for it but to walk, or to let me carry you as far as the house. You see the back road's too narrow for a carriage, and the great piers have tumbled down across the front approach, so there's no driving the right way by reason of the ruins. Plato thou reasonest well, said she, or words to that effect, which I could no ways understand. And again, when her foot stumbled against a broken bit of car wheel, she cried out, Angels and ministers of grace, defend us. Well, thought I, to be sure she's no Jewish like the last. She's a mad woman for certain, which is as bad. It would have been well for my poor master to have taken up with poor Judy, who was in her right mind anyhow. She was dressed like a mad woman, moreover, more than like anyone I ever saw her for or since. And I could not take my eyes off her, and still followed behind her, and her feathers on... Still followed behind her, and her feathers on the top of her hat were broke, going out in the low back door, and she pulled out her little bottle of a pocket and smelled when she found herself in the kitchen, and said, I shall faint with the heat of this odious place. My dear, it's only 3 steps across the kitchen, and there's a fine air in your veil if your veil was up, said Sir Condy, and with that he threw back her veil, so that I had the full sight of her face. She had not all the colour of one going to faint, but a fine complexion of her own, as I then took it to be, though her maid told me after it were all put on. But even complexion and all taken in, she were in no way, in point of good looks, to compare to poor Judy, and of all she had a quality toss with her. But maybe it was my over-partiality of the Judy, in which place I may say she stepped, that made me notice all this. To do her justice, however, she were, when we come to know her better, very liberal in her housekeeping, nothing at all of the skinflint in her. She left everything to the housekeepers, and her own maid, Miss Jane, who went with her to Scotland, gave her the best of characters for generosity. She seldom or ever wore a thing twice the same way, Miss Jane told us, and were always putting her things to pieces and giving them away, never being used in her father's house to think of expense in anything. And she reckoned, to be sure, to go on the same way at Castle Rackrent. But when I come up to inquire, I learned that her father was so mad with her for running off after his locking her up, and forbidding her to think any more of Sir Condy, that he would not give her a farthing, and it were lucky for her she had a few thousand of her own, which had been left to her by a good grandmother, and these were very convenient to begin with. My master and my lady set out in great style. They had the finest coach and chariot, and horses, and liveries, and cut the greatest dash in the country, returning their wedding visits. And they were immediately reported that her father had undertaken to pay all my master's debts, and of course all his tradesmen gave him the new credit, and everything went on smack smooth. I could not but admire my lady's spirit, and were proud to see Castle Rackrent again in all its glory. My lady had a fine taste for building and furniture and playhouses, and she done everything topsy-turvy, and made the barracks room into a theatre, as she called it, and she went on as if she had a mint of money in her elbow. And to be sure, I thought she knew best, especially if Sir Condy said nothing the one way or the other. All he asked, God bless him, was to live in peace and quietness, and to have his bottle or whisky punch at night himself. This were little enough, to be sure, for any gentleman, but my lady couldn't abide the smell of the whisky punch. My dear, says he, you liked it well enough before we were married, and why not now? My dear, said she, I never smelt it, or I assure you I should never have prevailed upon myself to marry you. My dear, I am sorry you did not smell it. We can't help that now, returned my master, without putting himself in a passion, or going out of his way, but just fair and easy, helped himself to an old glass, and drank it off to her good health. All this the butler told me, who were going backward and forward unnoticed with a jug, and hot water and sugar, and all he thought wanting. Upon my master swallowing the last glass of whisky punch, my lady burst into tears, calling him an ungrateful, base, barbarous wretch, and went off into a fit of hysterics, as I think Mrs. Jane called it, and my poor master was greatly frightened, this being the first thing of the kind he had seen. And he fell straight on his knees before her, and, like a good-hearted crater as he was, ordered the whisky punch out of the room, and bid him throw open all the windows, and cursed himself. And then my lady come to herself again, and when she saw him kneeling there, bid him get up and not forswear himself any more, but she was sure he did not love her, or never had. This was learnt from Mrs. Jane, who was the only person left present at all this. My dear, returns my master, thinking to be sure of Judy is what he might. Whoever told you so is an incendiary, and I'll have them turned out of the house this minute, if you'll only let me know which of them it was. Tell me what? Says my lady, starting upright in her chair. Nothing at all, says my master, seeing he had overshot himself, and that my lady spoke at random. What you said just now that I did not love you. Bella, who told you that? My own sense, said she, as she put her handkerchief to her face and leant back upon Mrs. Jane, and felt her sobbing as if her heart would break. Why now, Bella, this is very strange of you, said my poor master. If nobody has told you nothing, what it is you are talking on for this rate, and exposing yourself to me for in this way. Oh, no more. Say no more. Say no more. Every word you say kills me, cried my lady, and she ran on like one, as Mrs. Jane says, raven. Oh, Sir Condy, I that had hoped to find you in my father, brother, husband, friend. Why now, Faith, this is a little too much. All right now. Why now, Faith, this is a little too much, Bella. Do, Bella, try to recollect yourself, my dear. Am I not your husband, and of your own choosing? And is that not enough? Oh, too much, cried my lady, wringing her hands. Well, my dear, come to your right senses, for the love of heaven. See, is not the whisky punch jug and bowl and all gone out in the room long ago? What is it in the wide world you want to complain of? Ooh. Thank you kindly, Abbey. Important to keep drinking, I do appreciate it. Cheers to your health. Fair enough too, yeah. Maybe a little bent over. Let's straighten that back out. Keep it alright, right? Thank you kindly for both of those, Abby. Yeah. See, is not the whisky punch jug and bowl and all gone out of the room long ago? What is in the wide world you have to complain of? Still my lady sobbed and called herself the most wretched of women, and among other out on the way provoking things, asked my master were he fit company for her, and he drinking all night. This nettling him, which were hard to do, he replied that as to drinking all night, he was then sober as she was herself, and it would no matter how much a man drank, provided it did in no way affect a staggering. As to being a fit company for her, he thought himself of a family to be fit company for any lord or lady in the land, but that he never prevented her from seeing and keeping what company she pleased, and that he had done his best to make Castle Rackrent pleasing the worst since her marriage, having always had the house full of visitors, and if her own relations were not among them, he said, that were their own fault, and their pride's fault, of which he was sorry to find her ladyship had so unbecoming a share. So concluding, he took his candle and walked off to his room, and my lady were in her tantrums for 3 days after, and would have been so much longer, no doubt, that some of her friends, young ladies and cousins and second cousins, come to Castle Rackrent, by my poor master's express invitation, to see her, and she were in a hurry to get up, as Mrs. Jones called it, a play for them, and so got well and was finely dressed and happy as ever, and happy to look at as ever, and all the young ladies who used to be in her room dressing of her, said in Mrs. Jane's hearing that my lady were the happiest bride ever they had seen, and that be sure a love match were the only thing for happiness, where the parties could anyway afford it. As to a fortnight, God knows it were little they knew of the matter. My lady's few thousand could not last forever, especially the way she went on with them, and letters from tradesfolk come every post, thick and threefold, with bills as long as my arm, of years and years standing. My son Jason had them all handed over to him, and the pressing letters was all unread by Sir Condy, who hated trouble and could never be brought to hear talk of business, but still put it off, saying, settle it anyhow, or bid them call again tomorrow, or speak to me about it some other time. Now it were hard to find the right time to speak, for in the mornings he were at bed, and in the evenings over the bottle, where no gentleman chooses to be disturbed. Things in a 12-month or so came to such a pass that there were no making shift to go on any longer. There was all of us well enough used to live from hand to mouth at Castle Rackrent. One day I remember there were a power of company all sitting after dinner in the dusk, not to say dark, in the drawing room, my lady having rung 5 times for candles, and none to go up. The housekeeper sent up the footman, who went to my mistress and whispers behind her chair how it was. My lady, says he, there are no candles in the house. Bless me, says she, and take a horse and gallop up as fast as you can to Calico Fungus and get some. And in the meantime, tell them to step into the playhouse and try and see if there are not some bits left. And in the meantime, tell them to step into the playhouse and try and see if there are not some bits left. Added Sir Condy, I have to be within hearing. The man was sent up again to my lady to let her know that there were no horse to go, but one that wanted shoe. Go to Sir Condy then. I know nothing about all the horses, said my lady. Why do you plague me with these things? That was settled, I'll really forget, but to the best of my remembrance, the boy was sent down to my son Jason's to borrow candles for the night. Another time in the winter, and on a desperate cold day, there were no turf in for the parlour and above the stairs, and scarce enough for the cook in the kitchen. The little gossoon was sent off to the neighbours to see and beg or borrow some, but none could he bring back with him for love nor money. A little stop here for a note on gossoon. Gossoon, a little boy from the French word garçon, in most Irish family. The little gossoon was sent off to the neighbours to see and beg or borrow some, but none could he bring back with him for love nor money. So as needs must, we was forced to trouble Sir Condy. Well, if there's no turf to be had in the town or country, what signifies talking any more about it? Can't you go and cut down a tree? Which tree, please, your honour? I made bold to say. Any tree that's good to burn, said Sir Condy. Send off smart and get one down, and the fire's lighted before my lady gets up to breakfast, or the house will be too hot or cold, or the house will be too hot to hold us. You're always very considerate in all things about my lady, and she wanted for nothing whilst he had it to give. Well, when things was tight with them about this time, my son Jason put in word again about the lodge, and made a genteel offer to lay down the purchase money to relieve Sir Condy of distress. Now Sir Condy had it from the best authority that there were 2 writs come down to the sheriff against his person, and the sheriff, as ill luck would have it, were no friend of his, and talked about how he must do his duty, and how he would do it if it were against the first man in the country, or even his own brother, let alone one who had voted against him at the last election, as Sir Condy had done. So Sir Condy were fain to take the purchase money of the lodge from my son Jason to settle matters, and sure enough it were a good bargain for both parties. My son bought the fee simple of a good house for him and his heirs forever for a little or nothing, and by selling of it for that same my master saved himself from a jail. Everywhere it turned out fortunate for Sir Condy, for before the money were all gone there came a general election, and he being so well beloved in the country, and one of the old families, no one had a better right to stand candidate for the vacancy, and he was called upon by all his friends, and the old company, I must say, to declare himself against the old member, who had little enough of a contest. My master did not relish the thoughts of a troublesome canvass, and all the ill will he might bring upon himself by disturbing the peace of the country, besides the expense which were no trifle. All his friends called upon one another to subscribe, and formed themselves into a committee, and wrote all of his circulars from, and engaged all his agents, and did all the business unknown to him. They were well pleased that it should be so at last, and my lady herself was very sanguine about the election, and there were an open house kept night and day at Castle Rackrent, and I thought I never saw my lady look so well in all her life as she did during that time. There were grand dinners, and all the gentlemen drinking success to Sir Condy till they was carried off, and then dances and balls, and the ladies all finishing with a raking pot of tea in the morning. Indeed, it were well the company made it their choice to sit up all nights. There was not half beds enough for the sights of people that were in. Yet there were shakedowns in the drawing room, always made up before the sunrise for those that liked it. For my part, when I saw the doings that was going on, and the loads of claret that went down the throats of them, I had no right to be asking for it, and the sight of meat that went up the table and never come down, beside what were carried off to one or t'other below the stairs, I couldn't but pity my poor master, who would have paid for it all. I said nothing for fear of gaining myself ill will. The day of election will come sometime or other, says I to myself, and all will be over. And so it did. And a glorious day it were as any I had ever had the happiness to see. Huzzah, huzzah! Sir Condy Rackrent for ever, or the first thing I hears in the morning. And the same and nothing else all day. And not a soul sober, only just when polling enough to give their vote as become them, and to stand the browbeating of the lawyers who come tight enough upon us. And many of our freeholders were knocked off, having never a freehold they could safely swear to. And Sir Condy were not willing to have any man perjure himself for his sake, as were done on the other side, God knows. But no matter for that. Some of our friends was dumbfounded by the lawyers asking them, had they ever been upon the ground where their freeholds lay? Now Sir Condy, being tender of the conscience of them, and that had not been on the ground, and so could not swear to a freehold when cross-examined by them lawyers, sent out for a couple of cleavefuls of the sods of his farm of Gulty-Chinar, and as soon as the sods come into town, he set each man upon his sod, and so then ever after, they could fairly swear they had been upon the grounds. And then there's a little note by the author. This was actually done at an election in Ireland, which I guess confirms that most of the rest of these sides is fictional, because, you know. Yeah. So that was actually done. But yeah. We gained the day by this piece of honesty. I thought I should have died on the streets for joy when I seed my poor master chair, and he bare-eyed and it rained in his eyes as it could pour. All the crowds following up and down, and he bowing and shaking hands with the old town. Is that Sir Condy Rackrent in the chair? Says a strange man in the cow. The same, says I. Who else should it be? God bless him. And I take it then that you belong to him, says he. Not all, says I, but I live under him, and I've done it so these 200 years and upwards, me and mine. It's lucky for you then, rejoins he, that he is where he is, for if he was anyone else but in that chair this minute, he'd be in a worse place, for I was sent down on purpose to put him up, and here's my order for doing so in my pocket. Little note there that says to put him up is to put him in jail, which seems pretty good. Here's my order for doing so in my pocket. It was a writ that villain the wine merchant had marked against my poor master for some 100 of an old debt, which we're ashamed to be talking of at such time as this. Put it in your pocket again and think no more of it anywhere for 7 years to come, my honest friend, says I. He's a member of Parliament now, praise be God, and such as you can't touch him. And if you take a fool's advice, you keep out of the way of this day, or you'll run a good chance of getting your deserts among my master's friends, unless you choose to drink his health like everybody else. I have no objections to that in life, said he, and so we went into one of the public houses, kept open for my master, and we had a great deal of talk about this thing and that, and how it is, says he, your master keeps on so well upon his legs. I'd say he was off Hollandtide 12 months past. Now we'll better hire him his life, I said I. It's not that I'm after speaking of, said he. There were a great report of his being ruined. No matter, says I. The sheriff 2 years running were his particular friends, and the sub-sheriffs were both of them gentlemen, and were properly spoken to, and so the writs lay snug with them, and they, as I understand by my son Jason, the custom in them cases, is, return the writs as they come to them, those that sent them, much good may it do them, but words in Latin that no such person as Sir Condy Rackrent, Bart, will be found in those parts. Oh, I understand all those ways better, no offence to you, says he, laughing, at the same time filling his glass to my master's good health, which convinced me you were a warm friend of his art after all, though appearance were you were a little suspicious as at first. To be sure, says he, still cutting his joke, when a man's over head and shoulders in debt, he may live the faster for it, and the better if he goes the right way about it. Or else how is it so many live so well on, as we see every day after they are ruined? How is it, says I, being a little merry at this time? How is it but just you, as you see the ducks in the kitchen yard just after their heads are cut off by the cook, running round and round faster than when alive? I wish conceit you fell laughing and remarked you'd never had the happiness yet to see the chicken yard at Castle Rackrent. It won't be so long, I hope, says I. You'll be kindly welcome there as everybody is made by my master. There's not a freer spoken gentleman, or a better beloved, Iolo in all Ireland. Now what passed after this I'm not sensible, for we drank Sir Condy's good health, and the downfall of his enemies, till we could stand no longer ourselves. And little did I think at the time, or till long after, I was harbouring my poor master's greatest of enemies myself. This fellow had the impudence, after coming to see the chicken yard, to get me to introduce him to my son Jason. Little more than the man that never was born did I guess at his meaning by the visit. He gets him a correct list, fairly drawn out from my son Jason, of all my master's debts, goes straight round to the creditors and bars them all up, which he did easy enough, seeing that half of them never expected to see the money out of Sir Condy's hands. Then when this base-minded limb of the law, as I afterwards detected him in being, grew to be the sole creditor over all it, he takes out a custodian on all the denominations and sub-denominations, and every carton and half-carton upon the estate, and not content with that, must have an execution against the master's goods, and down the furniture, though little worth, at Castle Rackrent itself. This is part of my story I'm not come to yet, and it's bad to be foretelling. Ill news flies fast enough all the world over. To go back to the day of the election, which I never think of but with pleasure and tears of gratitude for those good times, after the election was quiet and clean over, there come shoals of people from all parts, claiming to have obliged my master with their votes, and putting him in mind of promises which he could never remember himself to have made. One was to have a freehold for each of his 4 sons, another was to have a renewal for a lease, another an abatement, one come to be paid 10 guineas for a pair of silver buckles, sold my master on the hustings, which turned out to be no better than copper gilt. Another had a long bill for oats, and half of which the half of which never went in the granary to my certain knowledge, and the other half were not fit for the cattle to touch. But the bargain were made the week before the election, and the coach and saddle horses were got in order a day. Besides, a vote fairly got by their motes, so no more reasoning on that end. But there was no end to them that were telling Sir Condy he had engaged to make their sons excisemen for our constables or the like. And as for them that had bills to give him for liquor and beds and straw and ribbons and horses and post chaises for the gentlemen's freeholders that come from all parts and other countries to vote for my master, and were not, to be sure, to be at any charges, there was no standing against all of these. And worse than all, the gentlemen of my master's committee, who managed for him all and talked how they'd bring him in without costing him a penny, and subscribed by hundreds very genteelly, forgot to pay their subscriptions, and had laid out in agents and lawyers' fees and secret service money, the Lord knows how much, and my master could never ask one of them for their subscription, he was sensible, nor for the price of the fine horse he had sold one of them, so it all was left at his door. He could never, God bless him again, I say, bring himself to ask a gentleman for money, despising such a sort of conversation himself. But others, who were not gentlemen born, behaved very uncivil in pressing at him at this very time, and all he could do to content him was to take himself out of the way as fast as possible to Dublin, where my lady had taken an house as fitting for him, a member of Parliament, who would tend to his duty there all the winters. I was very lonely when the old family were gone, and the things they had ordered to go and forgot to send after them by the stage. There was great silence in Castle Rackrent. Oh, there's an ad break here. Bad at catching those lately. Right, swallow water. There's a power break come up where I'll do a little bit of commentary, I think, so I won't start it now. I just assume there's like a chapter break or something similar come up in the next couple of pages. Which there's not, okay, so. Yeah. Where are we at actually? We're actually pretty far on. Only 35 pages from here. Maybe I will finish. Will I finish this tonight? How long will we be going? We'll be going 2 hours. We're a little over halfway through. It would be probably a little less than 4 if we was to finish tonight. How's the old throat holding up? It's doing alright. No ward. Right, and that's the ad break ended, so again, I never know if anyone gets caught in those because people seem not to, by all accounts, but we'll go back a bit because I know I was reading some of that during the ad break. Yeah. And worse than all, the gentlemen of my master's committee, who managed all for him and had talked how they'd bring him in without costing him a penny, and subscribed by hundreds very genteelly, forgot to pay their subscriptions, and had laid out in agents and lawyers' fees and secret service money, the Lord knows how much, and my master could never ask one of them for their subscription, you're sensible, nor for the price of a fine horse he had sold one of them, so all were left at his door. He could never, God bless him again, I say, bring himself to ask a gentleman for money, despising such a sort of conversation himself, but others, who were not so gently born, behaved very uncivil in presenting him at this time, and all he could do to content him was to take himself out of the way as fast as possible to Dublin, where my lady had taken an house fitting for him, a member of Parliament, to attend his duty there all the winters. I was very lonely when the old family were gone, and the things they had ordered to go and forgot to send after them by the stage. There was then a great silence in Castle Rackrent, and I went moping from room to room, hearing the doors clap for want of right locks, and the wind through their broken windows that the glazier never would come to mend, and the rain coming through the roof, and best ceiling all over the house, for want of the slater whose bill were not paid. Besides, there having no slates or shingles for the part of the old building which was shingled, and burnt when the chimney took fire, and had been open in the weather ever since. I took myself to the servants' hall in the evening, and smoked my pipe as usual, but missed the bit of talk we used to have there, sadly, and thereafter were content to stay in the kitchen and boil my little potatoes, and put on my bed there. There's a little note here for my little potatoes. Daddy does not mean by this expression that his potatoes were less than other people's, or less than the usual size. Little here is used only as the Italian diminutive expressive of fondness. I put on my bed there, and every post day I looked in the newspaper, but no news of my master in the house. He never spoke good or bad, but, as the butler wrote down word to my son Jason, were very ill used by the government about a place that was promised him and never given, after his supporting them against his conscience very honourably, and being greatly abused for it, which hurt him greatly, he having the name of a great patriot in the country before. The house and living in Dublin too were not to be had for nothing, and my son Jason said Sir Condy must soon be looking out for a new agent, for I've done my part and can do no more. If my lady had the Bank of Ireland to spend, it would all go in one winter, said Sir Condy, and Sir Condy would never gainsay her, for he does not care the rind of a lemon for her all the while. I'm just debating how much more of this to do. I think I'll make it a page. Yeah, I've got an idea. So 3 more pages and change will give us a little over 30 pages to do for the rest, which will be slightly shorter than this. And maybe we'll do a ghost story along with them. So I think we'll press on to the end of that and then call it for that. I think. I'm tempted to carry on through the whole thing, but I don't want to. I mean, the problem is I've done the badges and all that, so I don't want to push on too late. And I'll give people a chance to get them for 2 days, which is my plan. So we'll finish up to that point then. Now, I could not bear to hear Jason given out after this manner against the family, and plenty of people standing by in the street. Ever since he had lived at the lodge of his own, he looked down, howsomever, upon poor old Faddy, and were growing quite a great gentleman, and none of his relations near him. No wonder he were no kinder to support Sir Condy than his own kith and kin. In the spring it were villains that got the list of the debts from him brought down the custodian, Sir Condy still attending his duties in Parliament, and I could scarcely believe my own old eyes, or the spectacles with which I read it, when I was shown my son Jason's name joined in the custodian. They told me it were only for the form's sake, and to make things easier, than if all the land was under the power of a total stranger. And I did not know what to think. It were an odd thing to be talking ill of my own, and I could not but grieve for my poor master's fine estate, all torn by these ventures of the law. So I said nothing, but just looked on to see how it would all end. It were not till the month of June that he and my lady come down in the country. My master were pleased to take me aside with him to the brew-house that same evening, and complained to me of my son and other matters, in which he said he was confident I had neither art nor part. He said a great deal more to me, whom he had been fond to talk ever since he was my white-headed boy before he come to the estate, and all that he said about poor Judy I can never forget, but scorn to repeat. He did not say an unkind word of my lady, but wondered, as well he might, her relations would do nothing for him, or her, and they in all this great distress. It did not take anything long to what, let it be as it would, and I had no more malice or thought of the like in him than the child that can't speak. This night it were all out of his head before he went to bed. He took his jug of whisky punch. My lady were grown quite easy about the whisky punch by this time, and so I did suppose all were going on all right betwixt them, till I learnt the truth through Mrs. June, who talked over their affairs to the housekeeper, and I within hearing. The night my master come home, thinking of nothing at all, but just making merry, he drank his both a bumper toast to the deserts of that cold curmudgeon, my father-in-law, and all enemies at Mount Juliet town. Now my lady were no longer in mind she formerly were, and did in no ways relish hearing of her own friends abused in the presence, and she said, "Then why don't they shew themselves your friends?" "Then why don't they show themselves your friends?" said my master, and obliged with the loan of the money I condescended, by your advice, my dear, to ask. It is now 3 posts since I sent off my letter, desiring the postscript a speedy answer by the return of the post, and no account at all from them yet. "I expect to write to me next post," says my lady, and they were all that passed then. But it were easy from this to guess there were a coolness betwixt them, and a good cause. Next morning, being post day, I sent off the Gossam early into the post office to see if there were any letters likely to set matters to rights. He brought back one with the proper postmark upon it, sure enough, and I had no time to examine or make any conjecture more about it, for into the servants' hall pops Mrs. Jane with a blue hand box in her hand, quite entirely mad. "Dear ma'am, what's the matter?" says I. "Matter enough," says she. "Don't you see my brand box is wet through, and my best bonnet here spoiled beside, my ladies, and all the rain coming through the gallery window that you might have got mended if you'd had any sense. Daddy, all the time we were in town in the winter." "Sure, I could not get the glazier, ma'am," says I. "You might have stopped it up anyhow," says she. "So I did, ma'am, to the best of my ability. One of the panes with the old pillowcase, and the other with a piece of the old stage screen curtain. Sure, I was as careful as possible at the time you were away. Not a drop of rain coming in that window, all the windows in the house all winter now. Now, one of them I care, and now families come home and it's summertime, I never thought no more about it, to be sure. But dear, it's a pity to think of you upon it, ma'am. But here's what will please you, ma'am. A letter from Mount Juliet to town for my lady. With that, she snatches it from me without a word more, and runs up the back stairs to my mistress. I follows with a slate to make up the window, this window that were in the long passage or gallery, as my lady gave out orders to have it called, and the gallery leading to my master's bedchamber, and hers. And when I went up with the slate, the door having no lock, and the bolts sport were ajar after Mrs. Jane, and as I was busy with the window, I heard all that was saying within. Well, what's in your letter, Bella, my dear? Says he. You're a long time spelling it over. Won't you shave this morning, Sir Condy? Says she, and puts the letter in her pocket. I shaved the day before yesterday, says he, my dear, and that's not what I'm thinking of now, but anything to oblige you and to have peace and quietness, my dear. And presently I had a glimpse of him in the cracked glass over the chimney-piece, standing up, shaving himself to please my lady. But she took no notice, but went on reading her book, and Mrs. Jane doing her hair behind. What is it you're reading then, my dear? Fool, I've cut myself with this razor. The man's a cheat that sold it me, but I have not paid him for it yet. And what is it you're reading there? Did you hear my asking you, my dear? The Sorrows of Werter, replies my lady, as well I could hear. I think more of the sorrows of Sir Condy, said my master, joking like. What news from Mount Juliet town? No news, says she, but the old story over again. My friends are reproaching me still for what I can't help now. Is it for marrying me? Says my master, still shaving. What signifies, as you say, talking of that when it can't be helped now? With that she heaved a great huzzah, and I heard plain enough in the passage. And did you not use me basely, Sir Condy? Says she, not to tell me you were ruined before I married you? Tell you, my dear, said he. Did you ever ask me one word about it? And had you not friends enough of your own that were telling you nothing else from morning to night? If you'd have listened to them slanders, no slanders, nor are my friends slanderers. I can't bear to hear them treated with disrespect as I do, says my lady, and took out her pocket handkerchief. They are the best friends, and if I had taken their advice, my father was wrong to lock me up. I own that was the only unkind thing I can charge him with, for if he had not locked me up, I should never have had a serious thought of running away as I did. Well, my dear, said my master, don't cry and make yourself uneasy about it now, when it's all over, when you have the man of your own choice, in spite of them all. I was too young, I know, to make any choice at the time you ran away with me, I'm sure, says my lady, and another sigh, which made my master, half shaved as he was, turn around upon her in surprise. Why, Bella, says he, you can't deny what you know as well as I do, and it was an own particular desire, and that twice under your own hand and seal expressed, that I should carry you off as I did to Scotland, and marry you there. Well, say no more about it, Sir Condy, said my lady, pettish-like. I was a child then, you know, and so far as I know, you're a little better now, my dear Bella, to be talking in this manner to your husband's face. But I won't take ill of you, for I know it's something in the letter that you put in your pocket just now that has set you against me all of a sudden, and imposed upon your understanding. It is not so very easy as you think it, Sir Condy, to impose upon my understanding, said my lady. My dear, says he, I have, and with reason, the best opinion of your understanding of any man now breathing, and you know I have never set my own competition with it. Till now, my dear Bella, says he, taking her hand from her book as kind as can be, till now, when I have the greatest advantage of being quite cool, and you not. So don't believe one word your friends say against your own Sir Condy, and lend me the letter out of your pocket, till I see what it is they can have to say. Take it then, says she, and as you are quite cool, I hope it's proper time to request you'll allow me to comply with the wishes of my own friends, and return to live with my father and family during the remainder of my wretched existence at Mount Juliet's town. At this my polemaster fell back a few paces, like one that has been shot. You're not serious, Bella, says he, and could you find it in your heart to leave me in this way, at the very middle of my distresses, all alone? But recollecting himself after his first surprise, and at a moment's time for reflection, he said, with a great deal of consideration for my lady, Well, Bella, my dear, I believe you were right. What could you do at Castle Rackrent? An execution against the goods coming down, and the furniture to be canted, and an auction in the house all next week. So you have my full consent to go, since that is your desire. And you must not think of my accompanying you, which I could not in honour do upon the terms I always have been since our marriage with your friends. Besides, I have business to transact at home. So in the meantime, if we are to have any breakfast in this morning, let us go down and have it for the last time in peace and comfort, Bella. Right. Then as I heard my master coming up the passage door, I finished fastening up my slate against the broken pane, and when he come out, I went down the window seat with my wig, and bade him a good morrow as kindly as I could, seeing he were in trouble, though he strove and thought the while from me. Just going to pause here for a moment. There's a note on the word wig. Wigs was formerly used as instead of brooms in Ireland for sweeping or dusting tables, stairs, etc. He had a doubt of the fact that he saw a labourer of the old school sweep down a flight of stairs with his wig, and afterwards put it on his head again with the utmost composure, and said, "Oh, please your honour, it's never a bit the worse." It must be acknowledged that these men are not in any danger of catching cold by taking off their wigs occasionally, because they usually have fine crops of hair growing onto the wigs. The wigs are often yellow, and the hair which appears from beneath them black. The wigs are usually too small and aren't raised up by the hair beneath or the ears of the wearer. Strange thing. Seeing he was in trouble, though he strove and thought to hide it from me. "This window is all racked and tattered," says I, "and it's what I'm striving to mend." "It is all racked and tattered, plain enough," says he, "and never mind mending it, honest old Thaddy," says he. "It'll do well enough for you and I, and that's all the company we shall have left in the house by and by." "I'm sorry to see your honour so low this morning," says I, "but you'll be better for taking your breakfast. Step down to the servants' hall," says he, "and bring me up the pen and ink to the parlour, and get a sheet of paper from Mrs. Jane, for I have business that can't brook to be delayed. And have come into the parlour with the pen and ink yourself, Thaddy, for I must have you to witness my signing a paper I have to execute in a hurry." While I was getting the pen and ink on the sheet of paper, I ransacked my brains to think what could be the paper my poor master should have to execute in such an hurry. He that never thought of such things as doing business afore breakfast in the old course of his life for any man living. This for my lady, as I afterwards found, the more genteel of him after all her treatment. And I'll pause there. It's not a great stopping point. We're just on the edge of something, but if I go much further, there'll be little point in doing anything but finishing. And as I said, I don't want to finish this tonight, and I do start to feel a bit of a tug on my voice. We've been going for a good couple of hours, and many other good reasons. So, pause it there. Let's make some account of the tenure of Sir Condy, shall we? But first, let me have a little sip of water to wet my throat. There we are, right. So, Sir Condy is, by all accounts, the sort of last, or liable to be the last member of the Rackrent family. Rackrent family? I guess the Rackrent family, the old castle Rackrent, by this account. Again, it seems that this family is incapable of managing their debts in a way that is, I mean, it's pretty standard of stories about nobility, you know. They don't transact their business well. Let things get into arrears, and every single one of them bad with money in their own way. And then making a poor marriage on top of it all. Really made a pig's ear of things. And our man, of course, doesn't help by giving it out to one of his, well, not a creditor, I should say, by an executor of the law, sort of hot business tip to buy up the debts and execute them against him, especially while he's away. And of course, his own son not helping the matter. So, in all, it seems pretty poorly. It seems that our narrator himself plays a part in the downfall of the Rackrent family. And now the marriage is on the rocks and all things is coming apart. As I said, we're I think 48 pages out of 78 into this, so just shy of 2/3 of the way through. So the last 30 pages I suspect they'll all be about Sir Condy in the last one. It seems a bit more of a close consideration, the ends of the family and the accounts of the first three lords. But yeah, as to the book itself, it's a bit of an odd one. The asides and footnotes they're an interesting idea, but I don't think I like them much. A lot of they explain is sort of obvious in sort of context, as the language is probably modernised, and so these expressions ain't so unfamiliar anymore. And they seem to have quite a lot of tone to them that seems strange. There's some interesting ones, the ones about the fairy mound and the banshee and that, and a few other ones. But some of them is just odd. I don't really know. But yeah, I'm not in love with the voice, given the sort of strange grammar. It makes it a little hard to read, but it's not an uncompelling tale. I can see why it's considered a good book, but I must admit I'm not overly in love with it. Which is a shame because I had good fun designing the badges to go with it. But yeah, all told, I reckon it's all right. Not great, not terrible. I'll finish it out tomorrow, and maybe we'll have a ghost story if time permits and my voice holds up. And I'm almost tempted to press on today and do a bit more or something, but I think it's a bad idea. I think I need to stop now, even though I don't want to. Just getting a sense of it. But yeah, as always, I do appreciate everyone for stopping by, especially Danaska for subscribing. I do genuinely appreciate it. Always happy to have people come round. Thank you for listening in, and as always, I wish you the best of the evening or night or day or whatever time it is for yourself, wherever you happen to be. You're very welcome, Abby. I genuinely appreciate you sticking by as often as you do. Well, no, thank you, Naska. But yeah, I very much will. I appreciate all of you for being there. I feel like there's something more to say, but I don't really think there is. But yeah, I wish you all the best. We'll finish up tomorrow. Yeah, have a lovely rest of your day, and as always, ta-ra.